I'd never admit it to anyone back at the station, but I was nervous that night. First solo patrol on the northern highway, fog thick enough to choke on. My uniform felt heavier than usual, my hands sticky inside my gloves. The radio crackled once in a while, a low, distant static, like the world was half asleep and half warning. I remember the road being almost empty. Just the yellow lines, slick from earlier rain, stretching like veins into the dark. Headlights of passing cars cut through the mist, brief and ghostly. Every so often a pair of glowing eyes, cows or deer I guessed, would peek from the roadside, vanish before I got a good look. Alone, it didn't feel lonely. It felt watched. It was just after midnight when I saw him, standing on the shoulder, thumb extended like some cliché from a movie. I should have kept driving. My gut screamed it, but something else, a mix of rookie guilt and a hope to do the right thing, made me slow down. He was young, maybe my age, or younger. Dark coat, hood pulled over his head, face pale in the reflection of my headlights. The fog curled around him, as if it wanted to hide him from the world. He didn't move when I stopped, just stared. And then the hand. He raised it slowly, and even through the mist I could see his fingers twitch. A signal, or maybe a warning. Need a ride? I asked, more out of habit than thought. The words sounded hollow in the car, swallowed by the fog. He nodded once. No words. Sliding open the door, he got in silently, like he had always belonged there. I tried small talk, the kind officers tell themselves keeps things normal. Crazy night, huh? No response. His eyes didn't look at me. They seemed fixed somewhere behind me, past the windshield, as if he could see the road bending in ways I couldn't. My pulse picked up, though I didn't know why. The fog pressed against the glass like fingers, tapping, knocking, whispering. How far you going? I asked finally, trying not to sound too tense. He gave me a number, but it was off the map, a road that ended in the middle of nowhere, or maybe didn't exist at all. I hesitated, but nodded. Something in the way he said it so casually made it sound inevitable, like the road would take us there, whether I wanted it to or not. The first few miles were quiet. The tires hissed on wet asphalt. My eyes kept flicking to him in the rearview mirror. He stared straight ahead, hands resting on his knees, but I could feel those same strange movements under the hood of his coat. A twitch, a shiver, like he was alive in ways beyond normal. Then the first thing happened. A shadow flitted across the road, far too big for any animal. The fog swallowed it immediately, but my lights caught the outline. A figure, hunched, moving sideways. I slammed the brakes. The tires screeched, smoke curling up into the fog. "What the hell?" I muttered. He didn't flinch. Just tilted his head slightly, the gesture too calm, almost amused. "You saw that, right?" My voice cracked, high, too loud for the quiet car. Still nothing. But then I noticed his eyes. They reflected something. Not my headlights, not the road. Something deeper. Shapes, moving shapes, shadows curling like smoke inside the black of his irises. I blinked. They were normal again. I tried to shake it off. Rookie nerves. Hallucinations. Fatigue. But the hair on my neck stood up, prickling as though tiny hands were dragging themselves across my skin. The road began to feel wrong. I can't explain it otherwise. Signs I passed twice. A curve I remembered as right, turning left. The fog seemed thicker, darker, swallowing the edges of the road. My instincts shouted at me to turn around, to drive back to the station, but I couldn't move. My hands gripped the wheel like I'd never let go. I asked him finally, in a voice I barely recognized, "Do you know this road?" He smiled. A tiny, almost invisible curl of his lips. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't malicious. It just existed. And in that smile, I felt something crawl under my ribs, squeezing. "Not really," he said, voice soft, hollow, like it came from far away. But it doesn't matter. The words shouldn't have unsettled me, but they did. Because he didn't mean the road. He meant something else. I didn't know what. But I felt it pressing close, crawling into the car, twisting the air into something thick and cold. We drove in silence for a while. Or maybe it was just me driving and him existing. My own heartbeat sounded loud in my ears, echoing against the fogged windows. Every so often I'd glance back. Sometimes I thought I saw the edges of his form blur like he was melting into the shadows behind the glass. Then the lights. I remember them. Yellow, flickering like a dying street lamp. But no street lamp existed there. Just poles, empty, nothing but mist in the road. And in that light, I swear, I saw faces. Hundreds of them, pale and staring, pressed against the fog. Distorted, reaching, screaming without sound. I slammed on the brakes again, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went white. The car shuddered. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't even breathe in a way I could detect. Stop it! I yelled. I don't... My voice faltered. I don't know what you are. He tilted his head again, that same calm, that same quiet amusement. And then he whispered something so soft I almost didn't hear it. You can't leave. I wanted to argue, to accelerate, to drive straight through the fog, straight through the faces I saw, but my body refused. It was like something held me, something cold and deep under the asphalt, pressing through the tires into my spine. My stomach turned. My legs felt like lead. My hands were still on the wheel, but it didn't feel like me moving them. Minutes passed. Hours, maybe. I couldn't tell. Time itself seemed to bend around him. The fog wrapped tighter, thicker. Every sound outside the car, wind, distant horns, the drip of rain from the tree branches, was amplified, distorted, unnatural. I wanted to scream. My throat burned. But nothing came out. And through it all, he just sat there, watching, waiting. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The fog thinned, the road straightened. My hands loosened from the wheel. My heart, still hammering, began to settle. And I thought, maybe it's over. But when I glanced at him in the rear view, I realized I was wrong. He was smiling, not just smiling, grinning. That same hollow, knowing, impossible grin. And in that grin, I felt the first real pulse of fear. Deep in my bones, the kind that tells you you are no longer in control of anything. And I knew, with a certainty that made my stomach clench, that this night had only just begun. I didn't know it yet. But whatever he was, whatever had entered my car, it wasn't going anywhere. And neither, I was starting to realize with a creeping, crawling dread, was I. After that first night, I couldn't shake him. The hitchhiker, the pale figure who had slid into my car like a shadow. Everyone told me it was stress, nerves, the rookie jitters amplified by the fog and empty roads. But I knew it was more. The next shift started like any other. The northern highway stretched before me, empty and silent, headlights cutting through the mist. I kept glancing at the rear view, half expecting to see him standing there, waiting. My chest tightened at the thought. It wasn't paranoia, I told myself. Not yet. It was around midnight again, no surprises there, when I saw him. Standing at the edge of the fog, thumb out, waiting. The same coat, hood drawn over his pale face. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than before. Every instinct screamed to keep driving. Every part of me screamed it, but I slowed. The second he slid into the car, the air changed. Cold, heavy, like the fog had followed him inside. You again, I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. My words sounded hollow even to me. He didn't answer, only tilted his head slightly, watching the road ahead. Or maybe not the road. Sometimes I felt like he could see the world I couldn't. Shadows that weren't there. Corners of the road that didn't exist. Where are we going tonight? I asked. The first night's dread lingered like smoke in my lungs. He smiled faintly, and that tiny movement set my skin crawling. Wherever it goes, he said, voice soft but deliberate, hollow, distant. It was subtle at first. The way he shifted his eyes in the mirror. Not looking at me, not looking forward, looking behind me, over my shoulder, past the rear view, into some place I couldn't reach. My stomach tightened every time. I caught glimpses of it, reflections in his dark eyes, fleeting and impossible, shapes that moved against the darkness of the back seat. At first, I thought it was fatigue, my own nerves, but then I realized he wasn't just seeing things. He was reacting to them, ducking slightly, twitching his fingers as though brushing something away, smiling faintly at something I couldn't see. Do you see something? I asked, voice trembling despite my best effort. He turned his head slowly, just enough to catch my eyes in the mirror. Yes, he said. No explanation, no details, just yes. I felt my hands tighten on the wheel, knuckles white. What is it? Nothing you would understand, he whispered. And I believed him. The road twisted. I swear it twisted in ways it hadn't before. Turns that should have led to one stretch of highway looped back into the same stretch. Familiar telephone poles, the same bent guardrails, the same lone tree. Fog thickened around it, curling over the edges of the asphalt like liquid smoke. I tried to speak again. This isn't right. We should be past this point by now. My voice cracked. He didn't answer. But his eyes, those impossible eyes, kept flicking to the back, watching, tracking, seeing. And every time he did, my stomach dropped a little further, because I started seeing it too. Shadows, figures, glimpses of movement in the fog just on the edge of headlights, faces pressed to the windows of the car that weren't there a second ago. "Stop playing games," I hissed. "Tell me what's happening." "I'm not playing," he said softly. "I'm here. That's all that matters." I slammed my hand to the horn out of sudden panic, but it didn't help. The fog swallowed the sound before it traveled more than a few feet. I tried to accelerate, but my foot felt leaden. The car responded sluggishly, as if the asphalt itself resisted our motion. Then the first voice came, soft, murmuring, almost childlike, too faint to understand words. But I felt it inside my skull, curling around my brain, seeping into my thoughts. "Did you hear that?" I asked, panic rising. He didn't answer. Only smiled faintly, eyes glinting in the rear view. "Do you hear it now?" A shadow moved behind me just outside the back window. I spun in my seat, heart hammering, but the fog was empty. No trees, no figures, nothing. "Stop it!" I shouted. "Stop doing this!" "I'm not doing anything," he whispered. The voice was calm, deliberate. But his eyes told me he was seeing something I could not. Something alive, something waiting. I tried to pull over, tried to turn around. But the road twisted back on itself. The same bends, the same stretches. I caught glimpses of telephone poles with numbers carved into them that weren't there before. A lone figure standing in the fog. A shadow that darted behind the car just as I glanced back. I slammed the brakes again, and that's when it happened. He leaned forward slightly, resting a hand lightly on the seat between us. "Look," he said. I hesitated. And then I saw it. Reflected in the mirror, far behind us, something moving that shouldn't exist. A face pressed pale against the fog. Eyes wide, screaming, silent. And when I blinked, it was gone. But the weight of it lingered, heavy in my chest. "What are you?" I whispered, voice breaking. He didn't answer. Just stared forward, calm, like the world was a stage, and he was already 2 acts ahead of me. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time was fractured, unreliable. The road became a loop, the fog thickened, and the shadows seemed to press closer. I tried to speak, tried to demand answers, but each word caught in my throat, tangled in the fear that had rooted itself deep in my stomach. Then he did something new. He laughed. Not a loud laugh, just a low, quiet, almost imperceptible sound. But it was enough. Enough to make me flinch, enough to make my hands shake on the wheel. "You see them too?" he said. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I did see them, faces pressed into the fog, shadows curling along the edges of the windshield. Movements too quick to follow, too subtle to catch fully. And I couldn't understand why I hadn't seen them before or why he could. "Who are they?" I asked finally, voice trembling. "They're always here," he said softly. "Waiting." The car seemed to shiver, tires gripping the asphalt like it was alive. My pulse thudded violently in my ears. The fog seemed to lean in closer, pressing against the glass, curling around the car like fingers trying to touch my skin. I realized then that I was trapped. Not by him. Not entirely. But by the road. By the fog. By the things he could see. And by the unrelenting dread crawling over every inch of my body. "Why me?" I whispered. He tilted his head. That same faint, impossible smile. "Because you see too," he said. And that was when I understood. Not just that I was trapped, not just that the road was no longer mine, but that the hitchhiker, whatever he was, could see into places no living person should. And by bringing me along, he had shown me the edges of that vision. The rest of the night was a blur of fog and shadows. Figures fleeting, faces pressing against the glass, reflections in the rear view that weren't mine. Every time I tried to speak, my voice caught. Every time I tried to look away, I caught another glimpse of the impossible. And through it all, he just sat there, watching, smiling faintly, eyes flicking over the things I couldn't see. And I realized, with a growing icy horror, that this was only the beginning. Because when he could see into the darkness could see back. And it had already started. By the time I realized the road was no longer mine, it was too late. Every mile I drove that night felt like I was sinking deeper into a place that shouldn't exist. The northern highway was supposed to be straightforward. I should have been near the next town by now. But the signs, the poles, the guardrails, they all twisted and warped, looping back to the same empty stretch I had passed hours ago. The fog pressed against the windshield like wet cloth, cold and thick. My headlights cut through it in short, shallow beams, revealing nothing but the same cracked asphalt and twisted tree trunks. The hitchhiker sat quietly, his face pale and calm in the glow of the dashboard lights, watching something I couldn't see. "Are we going in circles?" I asked, my voice shaking more than I wanted. He didn't answer at first. His eyes, dark and glinting in the mirror, followed something behind me. Something I couldn't reach. Then he tilted his head slowly, like a bird examining its prey. "The road doesn't matter," he said softly. "Only the journey." I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white. "I don't care about the journey. I want out." The corners of the fog seemed to twist as I drove, reshaping themselves around the car. A curve I remembered taking left now led right. Telephone poles with numbers I couldn't read leaned impossibly as though bending toward me. Every mile felt like the same mile, repeated, looped, stitched together with fog and shadow. I glanced at the rearview mirror. His eyes were on me now, but not looking at me. They were looking through me, into the parts of myself I never let anyone see, the corners of my mind that I tried to ignore, the fear I buried deep under jokes and casual phrases. He could see it all, and he smiled faintly. I forced my eyes back to the road. Every instinct screamed to turn around, to drive back, to find something familiar. But the road had changed. There was no familiar, only the same mist, the same asphalt, the same impossible curves. Then I noticed it. The trees. They weren't ordinary trees anymore. Branches twisted unnaturally, forming shapes that resembled faces, eyes pressed from bark, mouths opening in silent screams. I blinked. They were gone. But the memory of them lingered, crawling under my skin. I tried to shake it off, blaming the fog, my nerves, the monotony of the highway. But the hitchhiker, he saw them too, or maybe more. Sometimes he would flinch subtly, just a twitch of his fingers, a tilt of his head, as though brushing away something invisible. Every movement was deliberate, measured, and it terrified me because I didn't know what he could see. "Why are you smiling?" I asked finally, unable to stop myself. "You know something I don't." His lips curved faintly. "I see what is always there." "What is there?" I demanded, voice rising despite my attempt to stay calm. "Tell me!" But he didn't answer. He only leaned back slightly, eyes flicking to something behind me. And then I saw it. A figure, pale and thin, standing in the middle of the road. Too tall, too still. No features except darkness where the face should have been. It didn't move toward the car. It didn't step aside. It simply existed, blocking the road. My heart froze. I slammed the brakes. The tires screeched. The figure vanished. But the lingering sense of being watched remained, heavier than ever. I gripped the wheel, knuckles white, and tried to drive. Straight, forward, anywhere. But the road twisted again, curving back toward that same empty stretch. I shouted, "This isn't real! This isn't happening!" He didn't respond. Just watched, and I realized then that he didn't need to respond. He knew. He always knew. The fog thickened, swallowing the edges of the car. My headlights flickered. Shadows moved at the corner of my vision, crawling along the asphalt, curling around the trees. I caught glimpses of faces pressed to the fog, pale and staring, mouths open in silent screams. And every time I blinked, they were gone. But the feeling, the crushing, suffocating pressure remained. "Why can't I leave?" I whispered, more to myself than to him. "You're already here," he said softly. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but it carried a weight that made my chest tighten. "The road doesn't let you go." I shook my head. "This is insane." "It's just a road. I can turn around. I can drive back, but the road refused me. Every turn I took brought me back to the same stretch. Every mile I tried to put between us was erased by the fog and the twisting asphalt." My hands shook. My vision blurred. The world outside the car was no longer familiar. It was a shifting, breathing thing, responding to him and to me in ways I couldn't understand. I looked at him again. The hitchhiker's eyes were wide now, dark and full of something I couldn't name. Shapes moved within them, shapes that shouldn't exist. Shadows that didn't belong to anything alive. And he smiled. That faint, impossible smile that made the hair on my arm stand on end. "Do you see it too?" I whispered. "Yes," he said. "It's always there, and it was, always. Faces in the fog, shadows in the trees, figures in the road, watching, waiting, following." I tried to speak again, tried to demand he tell me what was happening, but the words caught in my throat. Fear clawed at my chest, gnawing, twisting, making my heart hammer so loud I thought the car might shake apart. Minutes or hours passed. Time no longer mattered. The road twisted. The fog pressed closer. The shadows lingered. And the hitchhiker sat quietly, watching, smiling faintly, knowing things I could not. Then came the sound. Low, distant at first, like a hum under the engine. But it grew, a soft, crawling vibration in the air, moving through the car, pressing against my ribs. I realized it was coming from the fog, from the road, from the shadows themselves. Something waiting, circling, just out of reach. And he could see it. He could see it all. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the car into reverse and drive straight through the fog and the shadows and whatever else waited. But my body refused. My hands, my legs, my mind, they were trapped in the twisting road as surely as my car was. I could feel it pressing closer, crawling into the car like smoke. The shadows at the edge of the windshield flickered and shifted. Faces pressed closer. Mouths opened and closed without sound. And the hitchhiker? He leaned back, relaxed as if nothing were wrong. I swallowed hard. My throat felt tight. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered. He tilted his head slowly, that faint, impossible smile still there. "Because you can see it too." And I did. I saw the road twisting into itself over and over, a never-ending loop. I saw the fog curling like fingers, pressing, bending the air around the car. I saw shadows that weren't shadows, figures that weren't figures, and faces that didn't belong to anything alive. And I understood with a cold certainty that whatever this was, I had been pulled into it, not by choice, not by accident, by the hitchhiker, by the road, by the darkness itself. And I knew deep in my bones that the night was far from over. The fog never let up. It pressed against the windshield, against my skin, inside my lungs, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it had followed me inside the car. The northern highway had long since stopped feeling like a road. It was a cage, twisting endlessly, looping back on itself, swallowed by shadows and silence. The hitchhiker sat quietly in the passenger seat, pale and calm, hands folded neatly on his knees. His dark eyes tracked something behind me again, something I could not see. My chest tightened every time he did it, like the car itself was shrinking around me. "Where are we going?" I whispered. My voice sounded foreign, weak, swallowed by the fog. He didn't answer. Didn't need to. I could feel the tension crawling in my ribs, the cold pressure pressing down, and I realized it didn't matter. It wasn't about the road. It wasn't about the car. It was about him, and the way he could see the world that existed beneath or beyond the one I knew. The shapes returned. Figures flitting at the edge of my vision, faces pressed to the fog, shadows crawling along the trees. Every time I blinked, they disappeared, but the memory of them lingered, heavy, alive. And through it all, he watched, smiled faintly, knew, I choked on the words. "I can't do this anymore." He leaned forward slightly, just enough to catch my eyes in the rear view. "You already are," he said softly. "You can't leave." Panic rose in me, thick and viscous. I tried to turn the wheel, tried to accelerate, tried anything, but the car didn't respond the way it should. It moved sluggishly as if the road itself resisted my commands. And behind us, in the fog, shadows flickered. Watching, waiting, following. I felt my hands shake. My pulse pounded so loudly I thought it might burst through my ears. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught, raw and broken. And then I realized he wasn't just seeing the shadows. He was calling them, drawing them, and somehow I was trapped in their orbit. Hours or maybe minutes passed. Time was meaningless. The world outside the car twisted, a shifting, breathing thing. Trees warped, telephone poles bent impossibly. Road signs repeated themselves like a mocking chant. I didn't know which way I'd come from, which way I was going, or if I would ever reach anything familiar. Then I noticed it. His movement. Subtle, almost imperceptible. A twitch of his fingers, a tilt of his head, the faintest shift in his eyes, and with it, the shadows obeyed. They twisted toward him, curling around the edges of the car, lingering longer at the windows, pressing closer. "Stop it," I whispered, tears running down my face. "Just stop!" He didn't. He only leaned back, smiling faintly, calm, knowing, untouchable. And then it happened. I blinked, turned my head, and he was gone. The passenger seat was empty. No coat, no hood, no pale face. Just the lingering chill that had followed him inside the car. The fog pressed in tighter, wrapping around the dashboard, the wheel, the air I breathed. I spun around, heart hammering. Where? Where did you go? Nothing. Just the soft hiss of tires on wet asphalt, the low hum of the engine, and the fog, thick and unyielding. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it. Perhaps exhaustion, perhaps fear twisting reality. But the air in the car was colder now, heavier, as if something invisible had taken his place. Something that watched, waited, listened. And I realized with a hollow certainty that the vanishing was never meant to be literal. He hadn't left. Not really. I reached over the seat, checking the doors, the floor, under the dash. Empty. Nothing. My pulse hammered, my fingers trembling as I gripped the wheel. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe properly. And then I felt it. The weight of him, or what he left behind. A presence. Cold, deep, crawling under my skin. Not alive, not dead. Something else. Watching, waiting, and I was alone with it now. Alone, but not alone. I tried to focus on the road. Tried to follow it, to get out, to find a town, a light, a sign of life. But the highway had become a maze. Curves I recognized bent impossibly, looping back on themselves. Shadows of trees stretched across the asphalt, warped and alive. Faces pressed against the fog, mouths open in silent screams. Every time I blinked, they vanished. But the dread remained, thick in my chest, clawing at my ribs. I realized then that the hitchhiker's disappearance was not a release. It was a transfer. The road had claimed him, or perhaps he had always belonged to it. And now I was the passenger, whether I liked it or not. My hands shook violently on the wheel. I wanted to drive faster, to escape, to scream into the fog, but my foot felt heavy, my limbs leaden. The car moved, but not where I intended. The road twisted, bent, and curved in ways that defied logic. Every mile felt like a loop. Every shadow, a reminder that something watched, something waited. I spoke aloud, voice raw and trembling. "If you're here, show yourself!" Silence. The fog swallowed my words. And then a flicker, a movement at the edge of the windshield. Something pale, impossibly thin, stretching just beyond recognition. I blinked, gone, my chest heaved. My mind raced. The knowledge sank in slowly, terrifyingly. He had never been just a hitchhiker, not just a person. He was a doorway, a guide, a key to the darkness that existed alongside, beneath, and beyond our world. And now I had seen too much. I had been touched by it. I drove for what felt like hours, or perhaps minutes. Time no longer mattered. The fog twisted around the car like fingers, pressing against me, whispering, crawling under the skin. The shadows followed, flickering at the edge of my vision. Faces, mouths opening silently, pressed closer. And always, the feeling of him lingered, watching, waiting, smiling faintly from nowhere. Finally, the fog thinned slightly. The road stretched ahead, straight and empty, more normal than it had been. My pulse still thundered in my ears. My hands shook uncontrollably on the wheel. I looked around, bracing for the impossible, but he was gone, or so I thought. The chill remained, crawling along my spine, settling in my chest. And every now and then, when the wind shifted or headlights caught a reflection in the fog, I swear I see him, just a flicker in the corner of my eye. A pale shape, smiling faintly, watching, waiting. I drove the rest of the night in silence, unable to speak, unable to shake the weight of what had happened. When morning finally came, the fog lifted. The highway looked ordinary. Nothing seemed out of place. But the memory remained, as vivid and cold as if it were happening again. I returned to the station, but I didn't speak of it. No one would understand. And maybe part of me didn't want them to. Because the truth is, he never really left. And I know now, with a certainty that will haunt me until my last breath. The hitchhiker never leaves, not really. He waits. And one day, the road will call me back. The fog was thick that night, the kind that swallows sound before it even reaches your ears. You can see it lying across the road like a blanket pressing down on everything. When I drove into it, my headlights barely pierced the gray, and the beams seemed to bend like the fog itself was alive, moving just out of reach of the light. I wasn't expecting much, a standard traffic accident call, nothing extraordinary. But there's a certain quiet in these rural roads, a silence that doesn't feel like nothing. It feels like it's waiting. I parked my cruiser on the shoulder, the engine humming low, almost apologetic. The fog rolled in waves, blotting out the road behind me. I could barely see a few feet ahead. When I stepped out, the dampness hit me first, cold and wet, sticking to my uniform, seeping into my boots. Every step I took made a faint sucking noise against the soft asphalt, almost like the road itself was breathing under my weight. There was a car up ahead, smashed into a tree. The metal was crumpled like paper, and the windshield looked like a frozen screen. The fog made it impossible to see if anyone was inside, and I reached for my flashlight, hand shaking slightly. I don't usually get nervous on the job. I've been at scenes like this before dozens of times, but this felt different. Then I saw them. At first I thought it was another driver lost in the fog, figures standing in the road, just beyond the glow of my headlights. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. There shouldn't be anyone there. Not at this hour, not on this stretch of highway. But the figures didn't move, didn't react to the light. Just stood there, silent, waiting. I called out. "Hello, you okay?" My voice sounded muffled, swallowed by the fog, bouncing back to me in distorted echoes. The figures didn't answer. I took a cautious step forward. My flashlight's beam trembled across them. They weren't people, or at least not like anyone I had ever seen. The shapes were human, vaguely, but they lacked detail, like someone had smeared paint across a photograph. Their edges wavered, shifting ever so slightly, like heat rising from asphalt in summer, but colder. A chill ran down my spine, the kind that leaves you unable to move, trapped in a thought you can't quite finish. I forced my legs to step closer, flashlight raised, heart hammering in my chest. Each step made the fog seem heavier, thicker, pressing in from all sides. It smelled faintly of wet earth and something else. Something metallic, coppery, old. I got closer and one of them tilted its head, slowly, almost lazily. There was no face, no expression, just the shape of a head moving. My stomach twisted. My mind screamed to turn, to run, but my feet stayed planted. I wanted to know what this was. Needed to see it. Then a light blazed, not from my flashlight, not from the cruiser. A pure, blinding white that appeared behind them, cutting through the fog like a knife. I stumbled backward, shielding my eyes. When I looked again, the figures were gone, vanished, just nothing. The road lay empty, as if I had imagined everything. I crouched by the wrecked car, heart pounding, telling myself it was stress, exhaustion, fog playing tricks. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I could hear faint movement in the fog, like whispers brushing past my ears, but when I turned, there was nothing. Then I heard a voice, soft and almost casual, carried in the fog. "Don't come closer." I spun around. Nothing. No one. Just the fog, thick and suffocating. My hand trembled on my radio. "Dispatch, I need backup at mile marker 22. Accident scene. Possible. Unusual circumstances." My voice cracked, and I cursed under my breath. My badge felt heavy on my chest, almost like it weighed me down, pinned me to the ground. The fog shifted, and I thought I saw movement again. Figures, or was it just shadows twisting in the mist? Every time I focused, they seemed to vanish, melting into the gray. But I could feel them watching, waiting. I don't know how long I stood there, breathing the damp air, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. Then headlights. Another car approaching, low beams slicing through the fog. Relief hit me like a wave. Someone else. Someone real. But as the vehicle neared, something was wrong. The car didn't slow, didn't swerve around the wreck. It passed straight through, as if the scene didn't exist. My mouth went dry. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. And when I looked again, the car was gone, just gone. I took a step forward, my boots squelching in the wet asphalt. My mind raced. "Did anyone else see that?" I whispered to the empty night. The silence answered with nothing. My radio crackled faintly. "Unit 21, do you copy?" I reached for it. I need just a confirmation of traffic in the area, but only static." I backed up toward the cruiser, flashlight shaking in my grip. Every shadow in the fog seemed to reach for me, stretching and bending in impossible ways. My chest tightened. The metallic smell grew stronger, sharp in my nose. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. My feet felt heavy, like they were part of the asphalt. Then I heard it again. The voice. Closer this time. "You shouldn't be here." I froze. There was no source, no direction. Just that calm, almost bored tone, cutting through the fog and straight into my mind. My pulse pounded in my ears. I felt exposed, like the fog had found me out. I forced myself to move. One careful step, then another. I rounded the cruiser, flashlight bouncing, and I saw it. At the edge of the light, just barely, a figure crouched near the tree the car had hit. Not human, not entirely. A shape. A shadow with something wrong about it. It didn't move as I approached. It didn't breathe. It just waited, a weight pressing down through the fog and into my chest. I raised my radio again. "Dispatch, I need..." My words cut off as the figure tilted its head slowly, the same lazy, unnatural motion. And then the headlights, another blinding flash, white and pure. My vision swam. When I could see again, the figure was gone. The road was empty. The wrecked car lay there like before, but nothing else. No shadows, no shapes, nothing. Just the fog, thick and oppressive, curling around the trees like smoke from some long-dead fire. I got into the cruiser, shaking, hands wet, uniform soaked, heart hammering. I tried to start the engine. It coughed and then turned over, headlights weak, fading into the gray. I looked back at the road. Nothing. But I knew it had been there. I couldn't explain it. No one would believe it. And the fog. The fog was still moving, rolling forward slowly, waiting, remembering. I drove off, but the shapes lingered at the edges of my mind, flickering in the corner of my vision. Every bend in the road, every tree, every shadow, waiting, watching. I don't know what I saw that night, but I know I can't forget it. And I know that when the fog comes, you can never be sure who or what is standing in the road, waiting for the lights to blind you. I thought the fog would fade by morning. I thought light would make it harmless, that reality would reassert itself. I was wrong. The haze clung to the highway like a living thing, curling around guardrails and trees, swallowing the road ahead. Even in the daylight, it felt heavy, almost tangible, and it followed me as I drove toward the next call. The reports had been coming in all morning. Cars disappearing, reappearing, witnesses unsure if they'd seen what they thought they saw. It sounded ridiculous when I first heard it, the sort of story that makes you shake your head and blame fatigue or rumor. But standing there in the fog the night before, I knew. I knew there was something impossible at work. I parked at the edge of a small clearing, a section of road where the fog pooled thickly. The officers already on scene looked tense, pale under the fluorescent lights of their cruisers. A young woman sat on the curb, knees drawn to her chest, shaking. She kept repeating the same thing over and over. It just vanished. I don't understand. It was there. I crouched beside her. Take a breath, slow down. Tell me what happened. She wiped her eyes with trembling hands. I was driving. Just a regular road, and I saw it. A truck maybe? Or, I don't know. And then it wasn't there. I swear, I slammed on the brakes, looked everywhere. Nothing. And then She broke off, staring at the fog, as if it might answer her. I tried to nod, tried to offer comfort I didn't feel. You're safe now. Can you show me exactly where it disappeared? She led me to a stretch of road where the fog was thickest, curling over the asphalt like smoke from a fire that never burned out. I squinted into it, trying to make sense of the shapes and shadows. But there was nothing, until a faint outline flickered in my peripheral vision. A car. It emerged slowly from the mist, headlights dim and wavering. Relief surged through me. Another witness confirmed things were real, tangible. But then the car passed through the spot the woman had pointed to and disappeared. Just like that. No screech of tires, no skid marks, nothing. My stomach turned. I shook my head. Did you see that? I asked, voice low. She nodded, wide-eyed, terrified. It just vanished. I tried to rationalize it. Reflection, trick of the light, exhaustion. I tried everything my training taught me. But every time I looked, every vehicle that approached seemed unreal. They appeared, passed through, then dissolved like smoke. I started keeping track in my notebook, jotting down times, descriptions, license plates. Each entry made less sense than the last. One man told me he'd seen a motorcycle vanish in front of his eyes. Another insisted a delivery van drove through a guardrail and continued down the road, perfectly intact. I wanted to shake them, tell them it wasn't possible, that they were imagining it. But I couldn't. Something about the fog, the way it moved, the weight in the air. It made lying to yourself impossible. I stayed late, longer than I should have. My cruiser idled at the roadside, lights cutting through the gray but offering no answers. And then I noticed it, small, almost imperceptible. Every time I looked at a witness, even the frightened ones, their eyes flicked toward the road behind me. The fog moved differently around them, curling like it knew where we were, what we were thinking. One of the witnesses, a man with a calm voice, pointed to the road ahead. It's like the fog. It's watching us, he said. I frowned, unprepared for someone else to say aloud the same thought I'd been trying to bury. Watching us? What do you mean? Every time someone drives through here, he said, the fog, it remembers, it repeats. He gestured down the road. I swear I saw the same accident twice, in the same place, same car, same tree. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. You're saying, he nodded, it's like the road itself is recording things, then replaying them, but wrong, twisted. I wanted to tell him he was imagining it, wanted to retreat to some safe, rational thought, but I couldn't. That night, with the figures, the flashes of white light, the way the road seemed alive, I knew he wasn't lying. By nightfall, the fog had thickened again. I walked along the roadside, flashlight in hand, notebook tucked under my arm. The witnesses had gone home, all of them shaken, all of them uncertain. I stayed. I had to. Part of me hoped that by staying, I could figure it out. Maybe it would stop. Maybe not. I heard movement behind me, soft, deliberate. Not footsteps, not like any human walk. My hand tightened on the flashlight. I spun around, nothing, just the fog. But the air felt heavy, almost charged. Like the static before a storm. I could hear faint hums, almost like voices, but too distant, too garbled to make sense. I pressed on, deeper into the gray. And that's when I saw it. A car, small and dark, emerging from the mist. Headlights weak, barely cutting through. I stepped toward it. The car slowed, but didn't stop. I waved my flashlight. No reaction. Then it passed me. Through the road itself, almost like the asphalt had opened to let it through, and vanished. Nothing remained. Not a mark, not a sound. My stomach twisted. I realized then that staying here was a mistake. Something about the fog. It wasn't just recording accidents. It was interacting with them with us, testing us, watching, judging. I had to leave, but I couldn't. My curiosity chained me, and the part of me trained to investigate overpowered the part screaming to get out. I kept moving, noting details, witness statements, locations, times, but the more I recorded, the less sense it made. People described the same events differently. Some swore a car disappeared only to see it later in the same place, behaving impossibly. A young man said he saw a truck pass a guardrail, then vanish, only to reappear on the other side of a small bridge. I asked him if he had been dreaming. He shook his head. No, I was awake. I saw it. It was real. By midnight, the fog was nearly impenetrable. My flashlight barely made a dent in the gray. I walked slowly, methodically, trying to remember which events I had seen, which had been reported, and then I felt it. A pressure, low and insistent, pressing on my chest like the fog itself was leaning on me. I stopped, flashlight trembling in my hand. The air around me felt alive, twisting. Shapes shifted in the gray, figures, shadows, maybe memories, maybe hallucinations. I couldn't tell. Every time I focused, the scene changed, like looking through a cracked mirror. And then the whispers came, low, almost casual. I couldn't understand the words, only the tone. They weren't angry, not exactly, but they were patient, observant, expectant. I realized with a sudden, sickening clarity that I wasn't just witnessing the fog. I was part of it. My fear, my confusion, my mind, they were recorded, folded into its memory. I wanted to leave, to run, to call someone, anyone, but I couldn't. My legs refused to obey, anchored to the asphalt by something unseen. The whispers grew louder, circling, twisting. I could almost hear the voices of the witnesses I had talked to earlier. Their fear and awe merged into a single, distorted chorus. I raised my flashlight again, shining it through the fog. Shapes emerged, just barely. Figures crouched, vehicles half-formed, shadows bending unnaturally. And then they were gone, dissolving back into gray. I could feel their gaze on me, the weight of their observation pressing down. Hours passed. Minutes, maybe. Time blurred in the fog. Every vehicle, every figure, every whisper folded into a chaotic memory I couldn't untangle. I understood then that this was not just a road, not just fog. It was a witness. Silent, patient, eternal. And we were its story. Recorded, replayed, twisted. By the time I stumbled back to my cruiser, notebook soaked, hands trembling, I realized something worse than fear had settled in me. Curiosity, knowledge, understanding that this road, this fog, would never let go. Every witness, every accident, every impossible event, it was all there, waiting, ready to trap the next person who dared to see. I started the engine, headlights cutting weakly through the gray. And as I drove, I realized the fog followed, moving like a living thing, stretching and curling, pressing ever closer, carrying the memory of everything it had seen, and I knew I would have to go back. Because the road doesn't forget. And now, neither did I. The fog didn't sleep. Not at night, not during the day. It waited, curling along the road like smoke from a fire that had long burned out but refused to die. After the events I had witnessed, after the impossible disappearances and twisted reflections of reality, I understood something I could never unlearn. The fog remembered. It didn't just sit there passive, waiting for us to pass. It held memories. Every accident, every panic, every scream or whisper, it stored them, twisted them, replayed them for anyone who came too close. I returned to the highway the next night. Alone this time. The backup calls, the other officers, the witnesses, they were all shaken, unwilling to step back into that gray mass. I couldn't blame them. But I had to know. I had to see. Something about the fog had lodged itself in my mind. Insistent, whispering. The air was heavier than ever. The fog thick and clinging. It moved along the ground in slow, undulating waves, pressing against my boots, curling around my legs like it was alive. I could hear the faintest whispers, voices blending together, some crying, some laughing, some panicked. Each sound carried a weight, a memory, a tiny fragment of all the people who had walked this stretch of road before me. I parked my cruiser at the edge of the shoulder, engine idling softly. I stepped out, flashlight in hand, and every beam of light seemed to scatter uselessly into the gray. Shadows twisted at the edges of vision, figures half formed, half erased. I knew I was walking into something far older than me, something patient, intelligent, and merciless in its calm. I started along the roadside, notebook in hand, jotting down observations. But the notes felt futile. Every time I looked away, the fog shifted. Shapes I had marked would move subtly, impossibly. A smashed car I thought I had passed might be a new accident, or one I had already seen, replaying itself in a slow, grotesque loop. I tried to tell myself my mind was fraying, that the stress, the exhaustion, the isolation, it was making me hallucinate. But deep down, I knew better. And then I saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road, dimly outlined against the fog. Not human, not quite. Its posture familiar, the way it tilted its head, the slow, deliberate movements. It was like the shapes I had seen before, but clearer this time, closer. I froze, heart hammering, breath shallow. The figure raised its hand as if beckoning me forward. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed to flee, to retreat to the safety of my cruiser. But I stepped forward, compelled by some force I couldn't name, my boots sinking slightly into the damp asphalt. The fog shifted, and suddenly I was somewhere else entirely. Or maybe the road itself had changed. There was a scene I didn't remember being there before. A twisted car crash, metal mangled, smoke rising. But the headlights were different. I could see myself, or someone like me, running toward the wreck, flashlight shaking, heart pounding. I watched, frozen, as the scene played out. It was my own memory, or was it a replay? The lines blurred, time folding over itself, the fog reshaping the past into a living tableau. I stumbled backward, notebook falling, hands shaking. The fog around me thickened, curling higher, pressing closer. And then I saw more. Another scene, another accident, another scream echoing silently through the mist. And another, all of them layered, overlapping, each one slightly distorted, some faces unrecognizable, others all too familiar. I realized the fog didn't just remember accidents. It remembered us. Every fear, every moment of panic, every fleeting thought in the minds of those who passed through. I turned in a slow circle, flashlight cutting through the gray. Figures emerged from the mist, crouching, standing, bending unnaturally. Vehicles appeared, headlights flickering, tires spinning on nothing, engines revving in silence. Every replay was slightly off, angles wrong, colors wrong, shadows moving independently. The fog didn't just recall, it twisted, reshaped, rehearsed its memories for its own inscrutable purposes. A whisper brushed my ear. "Do you remember?" I spun, no one, just fog. But the words weren't carried by air. They were in my mind, intimate, invasive. The fog had learned me. It knew the events of my life, the fears I carried, the things I tried to bury. It threaded them into the accidents, the impossible vanishings, the shapes at the edges of vision. I stumbled forward, flashlight bouncing. Shapes flickered, reappearing closer than before, almost tangible. A man in a dark coat stood where a car had once crashed. His head tilted, his body impossibly still, his face a blank smear of gray. I reached out, but my hand passed through him. He dissolved, folding into the mist, leaving only the echo of his presence in my mind. I realized then the truth. The fog was a living archive, a sentient memory. It recorded, replayed, and fed on the fear it harvested. And now it had added me to its collection. My own memories, my panic, my curiosity, they were embedded in its shifting form. Every step I took, every breath, every heartbeat, it absorbed. I fell to my knees, flashlight bouncing, notebook lost in the wet asphalt. I wanted to scream, to curse, to demand release, but the fog pressed closer, folding around me, whispering in voices that weren't human, voices that were not mine, but somehow knew me intimately. I could see flashes of the past, other officers, other drivers, witnesses who had vanished or returned changed, all woven into the gray mass. I tried to stand, tried to run, but the fog clung, tugging, pushing, shaping me. My mind felt stretched, pulled thin. Faces swam in the mist, some familiar, some grotesque parodies. And then I saw my own reflection, not in glass, not in metal, but in the fog itself. My eyes wide with terror, my uniform wet and dirty, flashlight beam trembling. And beneath that, something else. A shadow behind me, not my own, slowly mimicking my movements. I realized with a sick clarity I had become part of it. My fear, my memory, my very self folded into the fog. And it remembered. It would remember. Eternally. I crawled to the roadside, trying to reach my cruiser, trying to escape. But every movement was slow, resisted. The fog whispered again. Stay, watch, learn. The words wrapped around me, not just in sound, but in sensation. I could feel every past scream, every vanished car, every impossible scene that had passed through this stretch of highway. They were alive in the mist, and I was now part of their story. I reached the cruiser at last, hands trembling as I fumbled with the door. Engine turned over weakly, headlights piercing the gray, but only partially. The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, fog curling around it, thickening with every yard I traveled. Shapes flickered in the distance. Figures crouching, cars suspended mid-air, impossibly replaying moments of fear and panic. I drove slowly, flashlight on the dashboard cutting dimly, eyes darting to the mirrors. Every reflective surface was alive with fragments. Past accidents, impossible disappearances, impossible figures, and sometimes me, watching, waiting. Part of the memory, part of the replay. The fog followed, always following, curling like smoke, pressing against the windshield, pressing against my mind. I understood then I could never leave it behind. No matter how far I drove, no matter how many roads I took, it would remember. And if I returned, it would remember even more. My memory, my fear, my presence, folded into the gray, eternal, patient waiting. By dawn, the fog thinned. The sun tried to burn it away, but I knew it would return. Night would fall again, and the road would reclaim its memories, and I would remember every detail, every terror, every impossible moment that had ever occurred. Forever. I don't know if anyone else will ever understand. The fog doesn't care. It watches. It remembers. And it waits for the next story, and so do I. I started my shift just after dusk, the sky bruised with purple and gray, the kind of light that makes the highway look like it stretches into nowhere. The asphalt was slick from the earlier rain, dark and reflective, the way it catches the headlights and taillights like liquid mirrors. I had just pulled onto the northbound stretch of Route 17, my car humming under me, the radio murmuring soft country music in the background, the kind of music that soothes your bones after a long day. I usually liked this time of night, the emptiness of the road, the quiet between calls, but something about tonight felt heavier. I chalked it up to fatigue, the kind that seeps into your skull after 3 consecutive night shifts. The streetlights were sparse, the horizon broken only by distant trees and the occasional billboards that glared like rectangles of ghostly white. It started as a flicker in the rearview mirror, a small glow, almost indistinct but persistent. Tail lights. Another car. I wasn't worried. Route 17 was busy enough at dusk, but as the minutes passed, I noticed something odd. The lights weren't moving like other cars. They didn't weave, didn't blink as though signaling, didn't fade behind hills or curves. They just stayed behind me, fixed, unblinking, like a pair of patient eyes. I tapped my brakes lightly, just to see if the driver would react, slow down, overtake, or pull off. Nothing. The red glow stayed unwavering. I felt the first stirrings of unease, the kind that creeps up your spine and makes your shoulders tighten without you noticing. I checked my speed. 65. The speed limit was 60, perfectly normal. But the van... Yes, I could finally see it clearly now. A rusty white van with streaks of grime and peeling paint kept pace effortlessly. It was older, probably a 90s model, boxy and imposing in the dim light. The windows were fogged, and I couldn't see inside. I squinted. No lights on inside, no shape of a driver visible, just a hulking, lumbering shadow on wheels, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Old vans sometimes creep along slower than traffic. Maybe the driver was tired, distracted, didn't realize they were tailing me. But I knew the road. I'd driven it countless times. This stretch was easy, straight, with enough long curves that any careful driver would either pass or fall behind. But this van, it didn't fall behind. My mind started wandering, the kind of wandering that happens when you're trying to rationalize something irrational. Maybe it was someone I knew. Maybe a retired officer testing me. Maybe just a coincidence. Yet, the more I glanced in the mirror, the more I noticed the details that didn't add up. No plates, at least none I could read. The van didn't have brake lights blinking when it slowed. It just glided silently, obedient to my every motion. I tried a few maneuvers. A small tap of the brakes, a slow drift into the next lane, even a subtle swerve. The van mirrored every move, as if it existed solely to shadow me. My pulse picked up. Not panic, not yet. Just the edge of alertness, the kind that makes you aware of every hum of your tires, every flicker of headlights in the mirrors, every sigh of the wind. I radioed in, a casual tone, pretending to be reporting traffic, though my stomach churned. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I've got a... I don't know." Rusty white van following me northbound on Route 17. No plates visible. "Just keeping an eye. Static." The radio crackled. I repeated myself slower this time. Nothing. The voice on the other end was gone, or maybe I was imagining it. I didn't push it. Sometimes the radio cuts out at night, especially on this old frequency. Minutes dragged, and the van stayed. It didn't speed up, it didn't slow down. Just relentless, patient. I tried to read the license plate again, squinting, leaning forward. Rust and grime coated it like cement. I couldn't make out a single letter or number. It was as if the plate had never existed. A sense of dread began to coil in my stomach. I didn't believe in ghosts, not really. But I believed in instincts. And something was very, very wrong. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. I glanced again in the mirror. The van's windows were darker now, opaque like smoke, and the outline of the driver had vanished. For a moment I thought I saw a hand, pale, gripping the steering wheel. Then it was gone, like a trick of the light, or maybe my eyes playing against the dark. I called it in again, this time a bit more urgency in my voice. "Dispatch, Unit 47, van following me for..." The radio burst with static. Hissing, popping, a high-pitched squeal that made me flinch. I dropped the mic, then grabbed it again. The van didn't care. It continued, silent, except for the soft hiss of the tires over wet asphalt. My stomach twisted. I tried not to think about what could happen if I were alone on this road, a dark figure in a van with no face, no identity, shadowing me for miles. It was just a vehicle, I told myself. A vehicle, nothing more. But the red glow of those tail lights felt personal now, like eyes burning into the back of my head. Hours felt like minutes. The stretch of Route 17 between the old gas station and the abandoned diner had never felt so long. The road signs blurred past, one after another, each marking a mile that I felt I shouldn't have been able to travel in this short span of time. And still the van was there. Always there. I tried a desperate thought. Maybe if I slowed down, it would pass. So I eased my foot off the accelerator, dropped to 55, then 50. The van slowed almost reluctantly and stayed behind me. My chest tightened. No driver obeys instinct like this. Then came the first real moment of terror. A curve ahead, sharp enough to require braking, the asphalt slick from rain. I hit the brakes hard, expecting the van to overshoot, expecting it to drift into the ditch or slide past. But no. The van turned perfectly, effortlessly, like it had anticipated every millisecond of my movement. I swallowed hard. My hands shook. I don't remember thinking clearly then. Only that I needed to get somewhere populated, somewhere lighted. Gas stations, diners, anything. But the van, it mirrored every thought. I turned onto a side road, hoping to force it into a turn it couldn't make. The road narrowed, trees closing in, moonlight filtering through skeletal branches. My headlights caught the van again. It was right there, as if it had simply teleported from the main road to this narrow strip. I slammed on the brakes. My heart was thudding, a deafening drum in my ears. For the first time, I saw the van fully. Rusted, peeling paint, the shape of decay. And the driver? Still invisible. I forced my gaze into the windows. Nothing. Not a face, not a shadow, nothing. Just darkness, I whispered to myself, shaky, almost inaudible. This isn't real. It can't be real. I tried the radio again, fingers trembling. Dispatch, please, anyone? Static swallowed the words. I dropped the mic again. I wanted to call it in as a report, but the rational part of my brain was screaming that this was no traffic violation. This was something else, something patient, something that didn't belong in the world I knew. I drove on, slow, careful, eyes flicking to the mirror every second. The van followed, tail lights glowing like two coals in the dark, silent and unyielding. My mind refused to make sense of it. No plates, no face, no reaction. Just following. I don't know how long I drove like that. The minutes bleeding together, each one stretching longer than the last. All I knew was the van was behind me, always behind me. And that was enough. Enough to make me wonder if the world I thought I knew had shifted. If something else had slipped in while I wasn't looking. Eventually, I found myself gripping the wheel, knuckles white, heart hammering. I wasn't thinking about law enforcement protocol anymore. I wasn't thinking about shift reports or traffic stops. I was thinking only about staying on the road, keeping the van behind me and praying that somehow I could reach somewhere where this nightmare could not follow. But even then, even as I turned onto another stretch of highway, the taillights stayed, patient, silent, watching, and I knew, deep down, bone deep, that this was only the beginning. I couldn't shake the feeling that the van was more than just a vehicle. I'd tried to rationalize it in the daylight, telling myself that maybe it was coincidence, some tired driver with no headlights. But tonight, alone on Route 17, I knew better. The road stretched ahead, black and empty, every mile marked by the faint reflection of my headlights and the soft, omnipresent red glow behind me. I kept my speed steady, trying to ignore it, trying to convince myself that if I ignored the van long enough, it would vanish. But ignoring it was impossible. My eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror, drawn to the persistent pair of taillights. Each time I looked, they seemed to grow sharper, more deliberate, like eyes aware of being watched in return. And then, I saw it. The driver. Or at least I thought I did. For a fleeting moment, just a blink in time, the van's window caught the reflection of a face, or rather, the absence of one. I froze. My hands tightened on the wheel. My stomach lurched. There was a face there, but it wasn't a face. It was blank, a void. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth, pale skin stretched impossibly flat over a head that shouldn't have been able to exist like that. And yet it was staring. I could feel it staring through the mirror, through the glass, through me. I blinked. The moment passed. My heart raced so hard I was sure it could be heard over the hum of the engine. I glanced down, then back at the mirror. Nothing. Just the van, ordinary now, the driver's seat dark and empty. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it as fatigue, a trick of the reflection, my mind playing games. But the memory of that face, or non-face, was seared into my brain. I couldn't forget it. Not really. I tried to focus on the road, the rhythm of tires over asphalt, the soft hiss of rain on the windshield. Every sound felt amplified, every shadow suspicious. The trees along the roadside seemed to lean closer, their branches like long fingers brushing against the car as I passed. But still, no matter how fast I drove, how sharp my turns, the van stayed behind me, patient, silent, watching. I risked another glance. Nothing. The van's windows were dark, opaque, as if it had swallowed the light. I strained my eyes, searching for that impossible face, but it remained hidden, and yet I knew it was there, somewhere inside that metal box. I remembered every detail from the moment I had first glimpsed it. The way the skin had been so smooth it almost reflected the faint glow of my headlights. The absence of eyes that somehow still seemed to watch me. The mouth that wasn't a mouth but pressed into the shape of a grin. I tried to force the image out of my mind, but it clung, like a shadow at the edge of vision. I reached for the radio, fingers trembling. My voice sounded small in the car, almost childish. Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I think I just saw the driver. Face. Can't describe it. Please advise. Static. The radio hissed and crackled, nothing more. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. Copy that, dispatch. Just keep me on channel. No answer. Of course, I forced myself to focus. I had to be logical. I had to be professional. I had to convince myself this was just a trick, a fleeting hallucination born of fatigue and too many hours alone on the highway. But the van stayed, always behind me, mirroring my every move, its presence suffocating and constant. The road curved, then straightened, then curved again. Every time I looked, I half expected the van to vanish, to be gone like a dream dissolving at dawn. But it never did. The red glow burned in the mirror, a reminder that whatever I had glimpsed, it was real. Or at least, it existed in some form I couldn't comprehend. I tried to recall if I had ever read about something like this, anything in police reports, local legends, anything at all. But nothing came. Nothing matched the hollow, impossible face that had stared at me from behind the wheel. My thoughts spiraled, refusing to anchor in reason. The van wasn't just a vehicle. It was deliberate, predatory, patient in a way that made my teeth ache with tension. I forced my gaze back on the road, but my mind kept drifting to that face. I remembered how it seemed to bend light around it, almost like it absorbed everything, leaving only emptiness where details should have been. And yet the memory wasn't precise. I couldn't hold it fully in my mind. Every time I tried to picture it, the features dissolved into blankness, impossible to recall clearly. It was maddening, like trying to remember a dream that slips away the moment you wake. I caught myself muttering to no one. "What the hell are you?" My voice sounded strange, foreign even to me. The van didn't answer. It never did. It didn't make a sound except for the tires sliding softly on wet asphalt. And somehow that silence was louder than any scream. I considered my options. Turn off the highway, pull into a gas station, try to confront the driver. But logic and fear collided. What was I supposed to confront? A blank face? A vehicle that anticipated every move I made? My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, knuckles white in the dim dashboard light. Then I tried something reckless. I slowed down abruptly, hoping the van would overtake me, hoping to see it pass, hoping for any sense of normalcy. But the van mirrored me. It slowed. It matched every deceleration, every slight adjustment of my steering. It was a perfect echo of my movements, a shadow tied to me by some unseen tether. I realized then that this wasn't a pursuit in the traditional sense. It was containment, observation. It existed to follow, to watch, to make sure I could never escape its gaze. And worse, I could no longer remember its face clearly. Every attempt to visualize it left a blank, a void, a memory that refused to form. I was remembering nothing, and yet the terror was absolute. The highway stretched endlessly ahead. I could feel the tension in my shoulders, the tight knot in my stomach. Each mile marker passed like a drumbeat, counting the seconds of my ordeal. And still the van stayed behind me, silent, patient, unwavering. I tried speaking again, my voice shaking, almost pleading. I see you. I know you're there, please. Just leave me alone." The words sounded foolish, even as I said them. The van didn't care. It never had. I drove on, barely noticing the landscape, the trees, the fading glow of the moon. My focus narrowed to the rearview mirror, the red glow and the impossible memory of a face that refused to exist in my mind. And yet I knew it had stared at me. I knew it had recognized me somehow, in that void where features should have been. Hours, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell, passed in a surreal blur. My hands were cramped, my neck stiff, but I couldn't stop looking. I couldn't stop thinking. The van had become the center of my reality, and all else had faded. There was only me, the road, and the hollow presence behind me. Finally, in a moment of desperate clarity, I realized something horrifying. Even if I turned onto another road, even if I tried to lose it in the shadows, the van would follow. It didn't need to know where I was going. It didn't need to anticipate. It simply existed to mirror, to observe, to haunt. And the memory of that face, or lack of face, was a curse. I couldn't remember it fully. I couldn't describe it to anyone. It was impossible to hold, and yet impossible to forget. Every time I tried, the features dissolved into nothing, leaving only dread, leaving only the certainty that something was there. Watching, waiting, patient. I whispered again, a prayer or a plea. I wasn't sure. Please, just let me go. And as I drove, the van stayed. Always behind me, always patient, always watching. The road felt endless that night. Rain had begun to fall again, a thin drizzle that made the asphalt glisten under my headlights like black glass. I could hear it tapping against the patrol car's roof, steady, hypnotic. It was the kind of sound that makes your thoughts drift in circles, pulling you toward unease without reason. And the van, still there, tail lights glowing like a pair of patient, unblinking eyes. I tried to focus on the routine, the hum of the engine, the feel of the wheel beneath my hands. But that calm was fragile. I kept glancing in the mirror, expecting some new horror, some change in the van, some revelation of the impossible driver. Nothing had changed. The van moved as I moved. Brakes, accelerations, curves. It mirrored every motion I made as if my decisions were no longer my own. I reached for the radio, hoping, somewhere in my mind, to hear the familiar static of normal channels. Voices of other officers' dispatch, anything to remind me that the world hadn't completely slipped away. I flicked the switch, and the static hissed through the speaker like a living thing, thick and alive, whispering under the usual hum of the radio. At first it was just white noise, the familiar crackle that accompanies any night shift. But then I heard it, words fragmented and distorted, buried in the static. I leaned closer, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached. "Unit 47, a voice murmured, tinny and distant. "Unit 47, come." I froze, my foot hovering over the accelerator. My pulse hammered in my ears. I knew no one had called me. This was my channel alone. Dispatch would never talk like that, in fragmented sentences, so slow and deliberate, as if the speaker were struggling to reach me through something else entirely. I grabbed the mic, my voice trembling. "Unit 47 here? Identify yourself." "This is, dispatch?" Static again. The words, however, remained beneath the hissing white noise, twisted into shapes that felt intentional. "You're here, too. Close." I blinked, swallowing hard. My stomach knotted. The van was still there, unwavering, unmoving behind me, tail lights like a warning. I tried to tell myself it was interference, cross signals from another officer's radio, something simple, logical, but I knew better. Something else was trying to speak through the radio, something alive, patient, observing. The rain intensified, pattering against the windshield, sliding down in streams that distorted my view. I squinted, trying to keep the van in sight through the water. It didn't flicker, didn't waver, just followed. And now, the voice through the static seemed to respond to me, almost conversational in its fragmented way. "You shouldn't be here." I gripped the wheel tighter. My eyes darted to the mirrors, scanning the van. I needed to see the driver again, to confirm that what I saw last time was real. But the window was opaque again, as if a shroud had fallen over it, hiding whatever had been inside. "Who are you?" I whispered, more to myself than the radio. The words came out trembling, broken. The static hissed and shifted. Then a voice, clearer this time, slipped through the interference. "Close, far sea." I pulled over briefly, heart hammering, breaths shallow. I didn't know if I wanted the van to pass or if I wanted to confront it, some irrational desire to see the impossible face again. But the words on the radio made my skin crawl, like someone brushing against nerves that weren't mine, pressing on fears I couldn't name. I tried to switch channels, hoping to escape the voice, but the static followed. No matter what I touched, no matter the frequency, it burrowed through, persistent and patient. And it wasn't random. The distorted syllables felt like they were coming closer, forming words only when I listened carefully. "You. Running. Can't." I swallowed hard, gripping the mic again. My voice was small, almost apologetic. I'm not running. I don't know what this is." The radio hissed violently, loud enough to make me jump, then fell silent for a heartbeat before whispering again. "Near, looking, watching." I couldn't ignore it anymore. The van was still behind me, but now it felt different. Closer, like it was synchronized with the voice, part of the same presence. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I felt the red glow pressing at the back of my mind, shaping my thoughts, twisting my sense of reality. I turned onto a side road, desperate, trying to escape, to find light, any sign of human life. The van followed. The taillights reflected off the wet pavement, a constant, oppressive presence. And the radio. It didn't stop. You, here, cannot leave. The words were slower now, deliberate, almost patient. I realized with a shiver that the voice wasn't just a message. It was a warning, a statement, a boundary, and I had crossed it. I tried reasoning, trying to focus on every logical explanation I could find. Interference, hallucinations, fatigue. But none of it explained the synchronization between the van and the voice. They existed together, two manifestations of something I couldn't name. Something patient, deliberate, inevitable. The rain continued, and the headlights of the patrol car cut through the misty air, illuminating nothing but road, trees, and the van behind me. Each mile marker seemed to stretch, bending time, slowing the passage of distance. And through it all, the voice whispered, sometimes clearer, sometimes swallowed by static, always there. See? You cannot escape! I swallowed hard, realizing that I was trapped in more ways than one. Not just physically, not just on the empty, wet road with a van behind me, but mentally. The radio had pierced my rational mind. It had touched something deeper, a fear I didn't even know I carried. And the van. It was the anchor to that fear, the embodiment of every impossible thought, every lingering dread. I tried to focus on my hands, the wheel, the steady rhythm of the engine. I told myself to breathe, to count, to anchor in reality. But the voice pressed in, filling every quiet space. You? See, cannot. I forced myself to look back at the van. The windows were opaque again, and the driver, whatever it had been, was gone from view. But the red glow of the taillights felt alive, burning into my memory, connecting with the voice, merging into a single oppressive presence. I realized then that no matter what I did, no matter where I went, the van and the voice were following me. Not in the sense of pursuit, but in the sense of inevitability. They were patient, unrelenting, omnipresent. And the face or non-face behind the wheel was not needed for them to haunt me. The absence itself was enough, I whispered again, almost pleading. What do you want? The static hissed, louder. Then a single, distorted word broke through. Alone. I shivered. Alone. That was the key. The van had followed me this far because I was alone. And now, with the voice through the radio, it had become clear that this presence thrived on isolation, on fear, on the sensation of being watched with no hope of intervention. I gripped the wheel with shaking hands. The road stretched on, endless, wet, reflective, illuminated only by headlights and the oppressive red glow behind me. And the voice, the van, the impossible combination of both, continued. Watching, waiting, patient. And I understood, in a way that made my blood run cold, that the highway wasn't empty. It never had been. The van had been there before me, during me, and it would be there after me. And the radio, the voice, the words warped through static. They were proof. Proof that whatever this was, it was aware, intelligent, and it knew I was helpless. The taillight stayed. The static whispered. The rain fell, and I realized with a hollow, sinking certainty that the night had only just begun. By the time I realized I had to do something, it was too late. The van had become more than a taillight behind me. It was a presence, a weight pressing down from the darkness of the highway, following me with a patience that made my skin crawl. The radio had gone silent, thankfully, but that silence was worse than the static. It was a quiet that didn't belong in the world, as if the night itself was holding its breath. I gripped the wheel, knuckles tight enough to leave impressions in the leather. I had to lose it. I had to get off this road, off this stretch of asphalt that had become a trap. I tried logic, tried every maneuver I could remember from police pursuit training, but my mind was fraying. Every instinct was screaming at me, and the van was already anticipating my moves before I even made them. I took the first exit I could see, a narrow road that branched off into the woods. My tires squealed against the wet pavement, sending sprays of water onto the shoulders. I glanced in the mirror, expecting it to hesitate, to miss the turn. But the van was already there, emerging from the highway as if it had been hiding in the shadows, waiting for me to make the move. I slammed on the brakes, heart hammering. My body shook. How was this possible? How could a van anticipate every turn, every choice I made? It didn't drive. It existed in some other dimension where my thoughts and fears dictated its movements. I felt like a mouse trapped, and the van was both the predator and the cage. I tried a series of evasive maneuvers. Hard turns, braking sharply, accelerating, swerving. Each time I glanced back, the van was already there, waiting, tail lights burning like twin coals in the darkness. I tried the shoulder, the dirt road beside the asphalt, anything to throw it off. It followed, always, patient, obedient to my every motion. I drove into a curve that narrowed sharply, lined with trees that scraped the car with skeletal fingers. My tires slipped on the wet leaves and mud, but the van navigated the same curve flawlessly. My stomach twisted. It was as if the van didn't belong to the same laws of physics I did. It existed in a space outside, yet tethered to me, always watching, always following. I forced myself to breathe, trying to calm my racing thoughts. But the reality of the situation was undeniable. This wasn't just a van. It was a presence, a force that observed, that mirrored, that punished curiosity with persistence. And the driver, whatever it had been, was irrelevant. The taillights alone were enough to make the night unbearable. I considered hiding, pulling off into a driveway, a parking lot, anywhere I could disappear. But the van anticipated that too. Every time I slowed, it slowed. Every time I turned, it was there. It didn't chase. It mirrored. And that made it far more terrifying. There was no escape. I cursed under my breath. I wasn't just tired anymore. I was panicked. My hands ached from gripping the wheel, my shoulders stiffened, and my vision was narrowing into a tunnel focused entirely on the road and the red glow that followed me. I tried reasoning. Maybe if I stopped completely, it would leave. Maybe if I abandoned the car, ran into the woods, or hid somewhere, it would disappear. I knew it was unlikely, but desperation clawed at me. I pulled to the shoulder, cutting the engine for a moment, just to see. My heart raced, ears straining for any sound besides the rain. The van didn't move. The taillights glowed through the mist, stationary but present, as if mocking me. I couldn't make sense of it. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. My throat was tight, my fear heavy and silent. I realized then that whatever this was, it didn't obey the rules of pursuit. It obeyed something else, something deeper, older, patient beyond reason. I started driving again, faster this time, desperate to put distance between myself and whatever watched me. But the van mirrored me perfectly. Every acceleration, every curve, every decision I made, it followed. It didn't need to anticipate. It existed in a way that made my movements predictable, as though it was a shadow tethered to my thoughts. I passed a small creek, the water glowing under my headlights like mercury. I tried to imagine the van disappearing into the mist, losing it in the night. But it remained, unwavering, obedient to my every move. I gripped the wheel so hard my fingers trembled. My mind screamed for escape, for logic, for reason. But there was none. Only the road, only the van, only the patient, unblinking red glow. I considered calling for backup again, but the radio had failed me before. Static, distorted messages, no connection. And I didn't dare leave a trace, not now. I had to survive the night before anything else mattered. Every turn I took, every maneuver I tried seemed only to amuse it. The van's movements were flawless, anticipatory, as if it could read my thoughts. My hands shook, sweat mixing with the drizzle on the windshield. My pulse thumped like a drum in my ears. I realized with the sinking clarity that it wasn't following me. It wasn't pursuing. It was omnipresent. My every move was mirrored, my fear amplified, my isolation complete. I veered off another side road, hoping to confuse it, hoping to trick it into overshooting. Mud sprayed under the tires, branches scratched the paint, the headlights illuminating nothing but shadows. And yet, when I looked in the rear-view mirror, the van was there, always patient, always waiting. I wanted to believe it would vanish if I drove into light, if I found other cars, if I reached civilization. But even as the thought formed, I knew it was impossible. The van didn't belong to the same rules. It didn't respond to logic or space or distance. It existed in relation to me and me alone. And that thought, knowing I could not outrun it, could not outsmart it, made my chest tighten with panic. The forest around the road grew denser. Fog began to form, curling around the headlights, softening the edges of reality. Each breath I took felt heavy, as though the air itself was pressing down on me, mingling with the fear that had been building for hours. My body ached, my mind frayed, and yet the van remained behind me, a constant reminder that the night had no mercy. I muttered under my breath, a plea to anything that might be listening. Why me? What do you want? The van didn't answer. It never did. But the tail lights glowed, patient, unwavering, unblinking, and somehow that was worse than words. It was proof that whatever this was, it didn't need to explain. It didn't need to speak. Its presence alone was enough. I forced myself to drive on, every turn deliberate, every choice made with precision. But the van mirrored me perfectly, every attempt at evasion futile. I realized with a cold certainty that I could never shake it. Not on this road, not in this night, not ever. And in that realization, a deep, hollow terror settled in my chest. The van wasn't chasing. It wasn't following. It was an extension of the darkness, a tether to my fear, a constant that would not be broken. No matter where I went, no matter what I tried, it would be there. Patient. Waiting. Always. I forced my eyes back to the road, hands gripping the wheel until my palms burned. Every nerve in my body screamed for escape, for daylight, for anything that might offer relief. But the van, it was eternal. And I understood with a gut-deep certainty that the night was far from over. The night had worn me down to a raw, trembling edge. My arms ached from gripping the wheel. My eyes stung from the ceaseless focus. And every nerve in my body screamed in exhaustion. But still, the van followed. Always behind me, taillights glowing like two patient coals in the dark, perfectly mirroring my every move. I don't remember exactly when the first signs of dawn began. Maybe it was the subtle lightening of the horizon, a gray creeping along the edges of the trees. Maybe it was the way the mist seemed thinner, the rain less insistent. All I knew was that the van was still there, a constant shadow that refused to vanish, as if the night itself had lent it life and was unwilling to take it back. I tried to convince myself this was a stretch of road I didn't remember, that I had driven in circles, that somehow I had fallen asleep at the wheel and imagined everything. But every turn of the road, every curve, every mile marker I passed, matched the reality I knew. The van's red glow persisted, patient, constant, unyielding. I drove on, the fog thinning, revealing more of the forest around me. Trees leaned toward the road, their skeletal branches still scratching the wet asphalt with a sound that echoed in my mind. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it happened. The van was gone. I blinked. My pulse thudded violently. I scanned the rearview mirror. Nothing. Not even a faint red glow. The road stretched empty behind me, wet asphalt reflecting only the faint gray light of dawn. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, uncertain whether to breathe, to scream, to laugh. I slowed, almost afraid to stop, fearing some trick of my mind. Had it disappeared, or had I finally succumbed to exhaustion, hallucinations, some long, delirious nightmare played out behind the wheel? I looked around, trying to ground myself in reality. Trees, fog, road, my patrol car. Everything familiar. Everything normal. But the memory of it, the van, the tail lights, the impossibility of it, clung to me. I tried to recall the driver's face. Or rather, the absence of a face. Impossible. The memory slipped through my mind, hollowed out, leaving only dread. I could picture the shape, the void, the smooth impossibility of it. But every attempt to focus left me grasping at air. I forced myself to drive on, cautious, almost afraid that turning my head might conjure it again. The highway stretched before me, the faint light of dawn spilling over the trees, painting the road in soft grays and whites. And yet, even in the absence of the van, I could feel it. Patient, waiting, a shadow at the edge of perception that might appear if I dared to relax, to breathe, to let my mind wander. My hands loosened slightly from the wheel. and I allowed myself to think, to process. Had it ever been real? Was it a trick of my fatigue, a hallucination born of long hours alone on the night shift? Or had I genuinely witnessed something impossible? Patient, sentient. The memory didn't offer answers. Only questions, only fear. I remembered the way it mirrored me. The curves, the turns, the moments when I slowed and it slowed, when I accelerated and it accelerated, as if tethered to my every motion by some invisible thread. It didn't chase. It didn't need to. It existed in the same space I occupied, an extension of fear itself. I pressed the radio, hoping for some grounding signal, some normal static, some voice. Only static. Harsh white alive. It reminded me of the distorted messages from the previous night, the fragmented words that hinted at proximity, at observation, at something horrifying lurking nearby. And yet, even that had vanished, replaced by nothing but the sound of my own breath, the engine, the rain-dampened asphalt beneath the tires. I tried to recall every detail, the peeling paint, the rusted exterior, the fogged windows, and the face, or the void, behind the wheel. Each attempt to visualize it left me grasping for fragments that refused to cohere. My memory had been hollowed out, as though it had taken the horror with it, leaving only dread, leaving only the certainty of having witnessed something impossible. I drove on, keeping my eyes on the road, scanning the horizon. No van, no taillights, just the slow arrival of dawn, the world returning to normal or some approximation of it. And yet the hair on my neck remained prickled, my muscles tense. I knew somehow that it had been real, and I knew that it was still out there, waiting, patient, watching. I thought about the hours I had spent, the miles I had covered, the maneuvers I had made to escape. Every attempt to evade, to outsmart, to outrun had been futile. And now, with the van gone, I felt a hollow emptiness, a sense of being untethered from the world I knew. It wasn't the van I feared anymore. It was the knowledge that it could return at any moment, silently, without warning, patient and inevitable. I pressed the accelerator lightly, testing the road, listening for any sound that might indicate its return. The patrol car hummed beneath me, tires slicing through the wet surface, engine steady. The horizon slowly brightened, revealing the familiar signs of the highway. Mile markers, road signs, the distant glimmer of buildings, civilization, safety. And yet, the dread persisted. I recalled the radio again, the voice that had whispered, fragmented, through the static. Alone, watching. Cannot leave. The words lingered in my mind, a reminder that my isolation had been complete, and that it was in that isolation that the presence had thrived. Even in its absence now, the memory of those words held power, a psychic tether that refused to release me. I slowed, letting the patrol car glide to a stop at the edge of a small clearing, trees giving way to the first hints of open ground. I turned off the engine, but I couldn't bring myself to leave the car immediately. I stared out at the empty highway, gray light washing over everything, my mind replaying the night in fragments, horrifying and surreal, and then I realized something worse than the van's disappearance. The absence itself was a presence. It left a vacuum, a hollow space in reality that felt like it might swallow me if I moved too fast, if I relaxed, if I allowed myself to forget. The highway seemed different now, less like a road and more like a threshold, a liminal space between the normal world and whatever this was, patient and observing, that had occupied it during the night. I breathed slowly, trying to ground myself. I tried to rationalize, to push the fear aside. But every instinct screamed at me that it hadn't gone. It never went. It had simply withdrawn, patient and silent, waiting for another night, another driver, another soul alone on the highway after dark. I reached for my radio one last time, half expecting, half dreading to hear that fractured voice again. Only static greeted me, thick and lifeless, no words, no hints, no sign of the presence that had haunted me for hours. And yet, the memory of it, the dread of it, remained. I started the car again, slowly, deliberately. The patrol car hummed to life, tires rolling over wet asphalt, engine steady. I drove onto the highway, following familiar signs toward the town, toward safety, toward sunlight. And with every mile I felt the tension ease, but never fully. The van's taillights had gone. but their echo lingered in my mind, persistent, unyielding. I thought about the impossible face, the void that had stared at me through the mirror, and realized I could never recall it fully. It had been burned into my memory in fragments, impossible to reconstruct, a psychological scar that would remain long after the van's physical presence had vanished. I would never forget that emptiness, nor the patient way it had followed, mirrored, observed. I drove on in silence, the gray light of dawn spilling over the horizon, washing away the shadows of the night. The road seemed normal again, lined with familiar signs, trees, and pavement. The highway was empty. The van was gone. The radio was dead. And yet I felt alone in a way I had never felt before. Alone on a highway that had stretched impossibly, endlessly, under a night that had tested every instinct, every sense, every nerve, and I knew deep down that it had never been about distance or speed or evasive maneuvers. It had been about isolation, about fear, about the certainty that whatever followed could exist beyond comprehension, patient, inevitable, waiting for the next driver foolish enough to be alone on the highway after dark. I pressed the accelerator lightly, merging onto the familiar stretch toward town, trying to focus on reality, on normality, on sunlight, and yet the sense of being watched, of having been observed by something impossible, remained. It clung to me like a shadow, a memory, a warning. The van was gone, but it was not finished. Not with me, and not with the night. I never liked driving alone at night, but the highway doesn't wait for anyone. The stretches between towns are long, empty, and at this hour, almost claustrophobic in their silence. The road ahead disappears into a dark ribbon, broken only by the dim glow of my headlights and the occasional flicker of distant street lamps. I had been on duty for nearly 10 hours, and my eyes were heavy, but the urgency of routine kept me alert. The gas gauge was teetering on empty, so I started scanning for the nearest truck stop. That's when I saw it, a pale rectangle of light, sitting like a forgotten island in the darkness. I pulled off the highway, the tires crunching on gravel that sounded unnervingly loud in the quiet night. The air smelled faintly of diesel, stale coffee, and asphalt. I parked near the pumps, the hum of the fluorescent lights above doing little to make the place feel alive. There was no other vehicle in sight, no moving shadow, not even a stray cat wandering under the pumps. Just silence and me. I stepped out and felt the cool night air hit my face. It was the kind of cold that seeps through the collar of your jacket, the kind that makes you suddenly aware of every nerve ending. The wind was slight, but it carried with it something else, something faint, high-pitched, impossible to place. At first I thought it was the pipes or the hum of the nearby highway, but then I realized it was a scream. A human scream, or maybe many, distant, muffled, like someone calling from the other side of a wall. I froze. My instincts kicked in, the part of me trained to approach cautiously, to listen before acting. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the source. The sound was fragmented, somewhere between a shriek and a sob, the kind of sound that pierces your chest without actually touching you. I told myself it was the wind, or a radio from one of the long-haul trucks parked further down the lot. But something in the way it echoed made my stomach tighten. It was not random. It was deliberate. And it was close. I walked toward the convenience store, flashlight in hand, expecting to see someone, anyone. But the lot was empty. No cars, no trucks, no people. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, but they did nothing to pierce the shadows beyond the immediate pumps. I tried calling over the sound of my own heartbeat, my voice rough and tired. Hello? Nothing. Just the echo of my words, stretching too long before dying away. The scream came again, sharper this time. I realized it was coming from behind the building. My gut twisted and I swallowed hard, tasting copper in my mouth. I moved carefully, keeping the flashlight steady. Every crack of gravel under my boots made me flinch. The back of the building was darker, almost black, the shadows swallowing the faint glow of the distant highway, and then it stopped. Complete silence. I stood frozen, listening to the rhythm of my own breathing. I tried rationalizing it. Maybe a person had passed through and left. Maybe it was a trick of the wind. But even as I told myself that, I knew the air had changed. It was heavier, colder, and it carried a sense of being watched. I rounded the corner slowly. Empty. Nothing but dumpsters and a faintly flickering security camera. I scanned the lot, shining my light across the asphalt. Every edge of shadow seemed too dark, too deep. My eyes kept catching movements in the corners of my vision, fleeting, impossible to focus on. I turned and nothing was there. I shook my head, trying to laugh it off. Just nerves. The lonely road, the endless night. That had to be it. I checked my watch. Nearly midnight. I had a long night ahead. Miles of highway, and yet I felt rooted to the spot, aware that leaving the lot would be like stepping into a void. I forced myself to the pump, lifted the gas nozzle, and started filling my tank. The hiss of fuel hitting metal sounded deafening in the quiet. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone or something to appear in the shadows. Then I heard footsteps. Just a few quick, deliberate steps behind me. I froze, the nozzle still in my hand, and spun around. Nothing, not even a trace. I even called out, voice louder this time, sharper. "Hey, anyone there?" Silence. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up. My pulse was high now, the adrenaline creeping in. I scanned the perimeter again, the lot stretching empty in every direction. I thought about the scream. How could I hear it so clearly just a few minutes ago, yet see nothing? My mind tried to fill in the blanks with rational explanations. Maybe a drunk driver, a trucker lost in the lot, or even some kind of prank. But my gut told me otherwise. My gut never lies. The sound returned, but closer this time. A low, wailing moan, like someone hurt, terrified, calling for help they couldn't reach. I spun, shining the flashlight into every dark corner. I thought about calling it in, backup, a dispatcher, anyone, but my phone was on silent and the signal here was patchy at best. I felt the weight of isolation settle over me. No one would hear me. No one would come. I gripped the flashlight tighter and started walking toward the back of the store again. The lot seemed to stretch, longer and emptier than before. Shadows pooled in impossible shapes, and every step I took seemed to echo back at me. Then I saw it, a small, almost imperceptible movement at the edge of the lot. A shadow detaching from the darkness just for a second before vanishing. My breath caught. I called out again, voice steady despite the fear clawing at me. "Hey, I heard you! Come on out!" Nothing. I circled the building trying to get a different angle, and that's when I noticed tire marks. Fresh, deep, leading toward the far corner of the lot where the lights barely reached. They weren't recent enough to be dripping with heat, but they were fresh enough to suggest someone had been here, moving fast or running. My stomach sank. Whoever or whatever had been here wasn't gone. They were watching. I shined the flashlight along the ground, trying to follow the tracks. They stopped suddenly, like whatever had made them had simply disappeared. No car, no footprints, nothing. Just darkness. The silence hit me harder than the scream had. It was not the absence of sound, but the absence of logic. Things didn't just vanish in a lit parking lot. I stepped back, a creeping unease crawling over me like cold fingers. The convenience store seemed suddenly smaller, the light from the fluorescent tubes dimmer, weaker. My mind raced, trying to push past the terror, telling me this was just fatigue, imagination, stress from the endless highway hours. But a part of me, the part that had been alive long enough to see real danger, knew better. I climbed back into my cruiser, doors locking automatically. The engine hummed to life, a fragile shield of normalcy against the oppressive darkness. I sat there for a long moment trying to calm my shaking hands. The scream hadn't come again, not yet, but I could still feel it pressing against the edges of my consciousness. A reminder that I wasn't alone, that the night had secrets, and I had just brushed against one. I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following me. Nothing, just the empty lot, the flickering lights, the shadowed corners where imagination and reality tangled. I told myself to leave, to put this place behind me. But even as I drove away, I knew the screams weren't over. They were only waiting for someone to stop, to listen, to see, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had seen them. Or maybe, just maybe, they had seen me. The highway had emptied behind me, swallowed by darkness and distance, but the sense of being watched lingered like a stain. I tried shaking it off, telling myself the last stop had just been fatigue and nerves, a trick of the mind in the dead hours. But the closer I got to the next stretch of road, the more I noticed things I couldn't ignore. Abandoned vehicles. Old rigs parked like ghosts in empty lots, their windows dark and opaque. I passed a small diner, its neon sign flickering lazily in the wind. The smell of burnt coffee drifted faintly through the air, almost comforting, almost normal. And then I saw the trucks, a line of them, parked haphazardly in the shadowed corner of a lot, engines cold, their lights off, but somehow alive. There were no drivers in sight. I pulled in slowly, the gravel crunching under my tires louder than it should have been, as if the night was listening. The lot was silent, but it had a weight to it, a tension that pressed in from all sides. I got out of the cruiser, flashlight in hand, and started toward the trucks. That's when I heard voices, not distant screams this time, but fragmented murmurs. Whispered sentences, incomplete, disjointed but urgent. Dark, not supposed to be here. Watch the shadows. They take, run. Don't look. The words made no sense, or maybe too much sense. The kind that seeps under your skin and makes the hair on the back of your neck stand on end. I shone the light into the cabs moving from truck to truck. The interiors were empty. No one inside. Just the stale smell of cigarettes, sweat, and diesel. But the voices continued, faint, almost as if they were coming from the air itself or the ground beneath the asphalt. I stopped at the last truck in the row. Something about it felt wrong. The paint was chipped, rust forming in patterns that almost looked like scratches made by something alive. I peered inside the cab. Empty. I tapped the window, the sound sharp and final in the oppressive silence. Then I heard it clearly this time, a low, tremulous voice from behind me. They're watching. I spun. No one. Only shadows stretched long under the pale light, bending in ways they shouldn't. My pulse spiked, and my flashlight trembled in my grip. I told myself I wasn't imagining things, that my senses were alert because I had been on edge for hours. But even as I reasoned it away, the feeling didn't go. It grew heavier, denser. I started walking among the trucks, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. That's when I saw them, or thought I did. Figures, hunched and trembling, ducking behind the tires and cabs. When I called out, they froze. And then slowly one of them emerged. A man, ragged, eyes wide and wild, hair matted, clothes smelling faintly of rot and diesel. He looked at me, then past me as if seeing something I couldn't. They come at night, he whispered, voice hoarse, almost broken. In the shadows. We tried to leave. But they followed. Who? Who's following? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, professional. But the fear in his eyes made my stomach churn. He shook his head violently. No, you don't understand. The lot. It's alive. It watches. Then another figure appeared, a woman this time, crouched behind a flatbed. Her face was pale, lips cracked and trembling. Don't go near. They're here. Her words were fragments, a rhythm of terror I couldn't quite piece together. I swallowed hard, keeping my flashlight steady. The voices continued, overlapping, broken by fear and desperation. Every truck seemed to hide someone, yet when I approached, the cabs were empty. I called their names, tried to coax them out, but the shadows swallowed them before my light could touch them. I could feel their fear as if it were my own. It clung to the asphalt, the metal, the very air, like a residue left behind by something inhuman. My mind raced, trying to understand. Truck stops are lonely, yes, but this was different. This was intentional, calculated. There was something in the lot that didn't want us to leave. They take us if we linger, the first man muttered. Watch the spaces between. Don't blink. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The wind picked up suddenly, rattling the trucks and sending a dry, metallic scent into my nostrils. The fragmented voices grew louder, more urgent, a chorus of terror that seemed to emanate from the cracks in the pavement. My flashlight caught movement again, shapes moving just beyond the light. Long, thin, impossible angles. I blinked, and they vanished. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were hallucinations. Sleep deprivation, stress. But the voices were real. I could feel them in my chest, vibrating with their fear. My skin prickled. My hands shook. And yet something compelled me to keep moving forward. To understand. To see. The woman whispered again. We forgot. We can't. Leave. Lot. Keeps. Her words dissolved into a rasping, incoherent whisper. The air thickened, almost tangible, pressing against my ears, my throat, my lungs. I could feel the shadows stretching toward me, brushing against the edges of my vision. Something in me screamed to run, but another part, a part trained to see through danger, trained to confront the unknown, held me in place. I approached another truck. Rusted, abandoned, the tires flat. As I shone my flashlight inside, I noticed scratch marks along the dashboard and seats. Fresh, raw, jagged, as if someone had clawed their way out, or something had clawed them in. The fragmented voices converged in my mind, overlapping, a tide of terror I could barely contain. Then I heard footsteps again, heavy, deliberate, circling behind me. I spun, flashlight slicing through the dark. Nothing, only trucks, only shadows. And then movement. Something slithering across the ground? I couldn't tell. My pulse thundered in my ears, the man whispered urgently. They come from the corners, from the spaces. You can't, see? Don't. The warning hit me like ice. I realized the lot wasn't empty. It never was. The shadows weren't just shadows. They were alive, observing, waiting. I tried calling them by name, trying to get some human response, but the lot swallowed all sound, all sense. Only the fragmented whispers remained. I backed toward my cruiser, heart hammering. Every step felt heavy, as if the asphalt itself was trying to hold me back. I glanced over my shoulder, silhouettes in the corners of my vision, moving, shifting, but impossible to focus on. The voices grew louder, overlapping, incoherent but urgent, pleading, warning, and then silence. I froze. The wind died. The air cleared. The lot lay empty again. No shapes, no shadows, no signs of the figures I had just seen. Only the trucks, silent, cold, like tombstones in the night. My flashlight wavered in my trembling hand. I felt like I had walked into a place that existed out of time, a void where fear lingered long after the danger had passed. The woman's voice whispered one last fragment as I stumbled to my cruiser. They remember. They watch. I slammed the door, locked it, and sank against the wheel. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. My mind raced, trying to process what I had just witnessed. Real people? Hallucinations? Or something else? Something the lot had claimed before, leaving nothing behind but terror? I tried to start the engine. The key turned slowly, deliberately. When the engine roared to life, I felt a fragile barrier of normalcy return. I looked back one last time. The lot seemed empty, normal, deserted. But I knew better. The scratches, the whispers, the figures that had vanished like smoke, they had been real. Or at least real enough to leave their mark on me. As I drove away, the lot faded behind me, swallowed by shadows and distance. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was following, that its gaze lingered on the road behind me, on my mirrors, on my back. And even now, hours later, I can't forget the fragmented sentences, the terror in those hollow eyes, the sense that the highway itself was a thin veil between normality and something predatory, waiting just beyond the light. I knew I would have to return. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to understand. What the hell had I stumbled into? And more importantly, what would be waiting when I did? I returned to that stretch of highway with a sense of inevitability, like driving toward a place I had already glimpsed in a nightmare. I couldn't stop thinking about the lot, the abandoned trucks, the whispered warnings. Something had claimed those truckers, something that didn't follow the rules of the living world. And despite the unease pressing against every thought, I needed to know. I had to see it for myself. The lot appeared exactly as I remembered it, pale under the flickering lights, empty, silent. My cruiser rolled to a stop near the center, the tires crunching the gravel too loudly. I held my flashlight in one hand, my service weapon in the other, a ritual I didn't really believe would protect me. The air was thick, heavy, almost viscous, and I felt it cling to my skin. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. Every logical part of me tried to reason that nothing had changed. And yet, the unease was undeniable. I stepped out and walked slowly, deliberately, toward the rows of trucks. My light cut through the darkness in a narrow, trembling cone. Everything looked the same. Nothing moved. And yet, I could feel it. Something just beyond the edge of perception. Something watching, waiting, feeding on hesitation. Then I saw them. Tire marks, deep and fresh, crisscrossing the lot in patterns that made no sense. They didn't match the positions of any parked vehicle. Some led to nowhere, stopping abruptly, as if whatever had made them had vanished mid-step. I crouched, inspecting the asphalt. Small scraps of cloth, a dented toolbox, a single work glove, abandoned, almost forgotten. I followed the marks slowly, each step a calculation, a negotiation with fear. The gravel beneath my boots sounded unbearably loud, echoing against the silent metal hulk surrounding me. Shadows shifted in the corner of my vision, elongated and impossible, like oil on water. I turned sharply, flashlight sweeping the lot. Nothing. But the moment I turned away, the shadows moved again. Always in the corners, always just beyond reach. I reached a patch of asphalt where the tire marks converged. There I saw them, handprints pressed into the surface, smeared and raw, the shape of human palms, yet impossibly long and thin. I felt bile rise in my throat. Something had struggled here. Something had left a mark. And yet when I glanced around, there was no one. No figure, no body, no evidence beyond the prints themselves. The wind picked up, rattling the trucks, tugging at my jacket. A low, almost inaudible groan emanated from the darkness, and I froze. The sound was organic and wrong, like metal bending under weight or flesh stretched too far. My flashlight wavered in my hand. I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves, reminding myself I was an officer. I was trained to see through fear, to act, to survive. But here, training felt like a thin shield against something that didn't care about badges or protocols. I followed the marks further into the lot. At one point, they led to a corner where the fluorescent light barely reached. I leaned over, shining my flashlight into the shadows, and saw a smear of something dark along the asphalt. Wet, glistening, fresh. And a single boot print next to it, impossibly large, impossibly deep, as if something enormous had stumbled or run. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. The lot felt alive now, pulsing with something ancient, patient. Every shadow seemed to twitch when I wasn't looking, every corner hiding the potential for movement. My heart pounded in rhythm with a distant, impossible sound. A whisper carried on the wind, faint, fragmented, echoing between the trucks. "Don't! Stay! Don't!" I spun, scanning the lot. No one, just trucks, just shadows. But my gut knew better. I followed a trail toward the far end of the lot, where the asphalt gave way to gravel and weeds. There I found a set of tire marks that ended abruptly beside a toppled truck. The cab lay on its side, glass shattered, metal dented, but there was no sign of the driver. No personal effects, no blood, nothing. Just a sense of sudden absence, as if someone, or something, had been erased from the world entirely. I crouched, running a gloved hand along the edge of the truck. The metal was cold, slick with condensation, and beneath it, faint scratches traced patterns in the gravel. They weren't random. They spiraled inward toward a darkened corner where the light couldn't reach. I could feel the tension in the air, heavy and expectant, like it was holding its breath, waiting to see if I would follow. And I did. The shadows deepened as I approached. My flashlight trembled, flickering as I tried to illuminate the ground. Shapes moved just at the periphery of my vision, long, thin, slithering, impossible. I blinked and they vanished. Every instinct told me to leave. Every rational thought screamed that I had crossed into a place I didn't belong. But curiosity, or stubbornness, or whatever madness clung to me, pushed me forward. Then I saw it. A handprint, pressed deep into the asphalt, smeared with dirt and something darker. Beside it, more scratches, deeper, jagged. They led up to the edge of a shadow, then vanished entirely. I felt an urge to kneel, to press my own hand against the asphalt, to see if I could feel what had left these marks. But fear held me back. My breath came in shallow, rapid bursts. Every nerve screamed that something was near. And then I heard it. A whisper right beside my ear, so close I felt the heat of it. "Leave." I spun, flashlight swinging. Nothing. Only trucks, shadows, the cold night air. My pulse was racing. I could feel the lot pressing in on me, alive in a way that made no sense. It was patient, deliberate, waiting. The scratches, the tire marks, the handprints, they were all warnings, evidence, echoes of struggle, left to remind anyone who dared stop that the lot kept its own kind of time, its own kind of justice. I backed away slowly, every step measured, my eyes darting to every corner. And then I noticed the details I hadn't before. Small, subtle disturbances in the gravel, like footprints that shouldn't exist. Scratches along the truck's sides that weren't rust or wear. Faint streaks along the asphalt that caught the light in unnatural ways. Signs of struggle that vanished when I looked again, like the lot itself erased them. The whisper returned, a chorus now, overlapping fragments that seemed to come from every direction. They don't leave. The lot remembers. I swallowed hard. The hair on my neck stood on end. I realized I had been here before, physically and in my mind, but the lot had changed. Or maybe I had changed. The fear I felt wasn't just memory. It was imprint, like the asphalt had absorbed something of me the last time I had been here, leaving an invisible mark. I took a step backward and stumbled slightly, catching myself on a truck. That's when I saw the tire marks again, fresh, leading away from the toppled cab, weaving toward the center of the lot, then vanishing into nothing. I could feel the lot watching, waiting, knowing I had seen too much. I didn't run, not at first. I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, trapped between fear and the compulsion to understand. I traced the tire marks with my eyes, and that's when I noticed it. The lot itself seemed to shift slightly, shadows moving in impossible ways, corners bending like fabric. The ground under my boots seemed uncertain, almost liquid in its patience. And then, just as suddenly, everything stilled. The wind died, the shadows froze, the echoes vanished. The lot lay empty, silent, normal. No marks, no prints, no disturbances. Only the faint glow of the flickering lights. I stumbled back toward my cruiser, chest heaving, mind racing. I glanced at the lot one last time. It looked ordinary, abandoned in the usual way a truck stop is abandoned at night. But I knew better. The traces of struggle, the tire marks, the whispers, they were gone, erased, leaving only memory. And yet, the unease remained. I started the engine, the hum grounding me in a fragile sense of reality. The lot disappeared behind me, swallowed by darkness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it had left something behind. A presence, a weight, a mark that wasn't visible, but impossible to ignore. Even now, hours later, the images linger, the handprints, the scratches, the whispers carried on the wind. The lot doesn't forget. It watches, it waits. And I know, deep down, that one day I will have to return. Not because I want to, but because it will call me back. And when I do, I will see it again. The shadows, the tire marks, the echoes of those who disappeared without a trace. And maybe then, I will finally understand the truth of the truck stop lot, and why it screams in the night. I'd been at the highway control room for hours. The kind of monotony that presses against your skull until your thoughts start echoing like empty tires on asphalt. The glow of the screens was cold, almost clinical, and I kept telling myself I was just checking the cameras, making sure nothing unusual was happening. But there was this one spot, mile marker 72, that always gave me a strange feeling. Something about the curve, the way the shadows pooled beneath the overpass. I couldn't explain it, but tonight it was calling my attention more than usual. I leaned closer to the monitor, the hum of the old computers filling the room, a low, consistent vibration under my feet. Traffic was sparse at this hour, just a few cars hissing down the lanes. I toggled the zoom, adjusting focus, telling myself I was only being thorough. That's when I saw it, a flicker in the frame, subtle, like a shadow moving against the grain of reality. At first I thought it was a glitch. Cameras over highways are old, their lenses scratched or fogged over. But this, it wasn't the usual static. It moved too purposefully, like it had intent. I squinted, leaning so close my nose nearly touched the screen. The figure was vague at first, just a dark shape. But then, as I watched, It seemed to take on the form of a person, standing right in the middle of the empty lane. I froze, hand hovering over the mouse. My mind screamed at me that it was impossible. There was no one there. The highway had been empty for at least 20 minutes. I clicked the live feed button, thinking maybe the camera had stuttered, and sure enough, the lane was empty. Nothing. Just asphalt and the dull white lines stretching into the dark. My heart started to thud harder than it should. Must be tired, I muttered to myself. The room was silent except for the low buzz of the computers. Maybe I had been staring too long. Maybe I needed coffee. Maybe I was imagining it. I rewound the footage a few seconds, trying to see the shadow again. And then I saw it move, definitely move across the lane just beyond the painted line. It didn't walk like a person. Not really. Its movement was wrong, jerky, almost sliding across the asphalt like a figure in a poorly rendered video game. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Just a trick of light, something reflecting off a sign or the road. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The more I stared, the more I felt like it was aware I was watching. It paused, just for a second, in the middle of the lane, and I could swear it turned toward the camera. Even though the camera's angle should have made that impossible, I felt like it looked right at me. My fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. My throat went dry. I tried to rationalize it. An animal? A maintenance worker? A lost hitchhiker? None of it fit. There was nothing in the reports. No one had been on the highway. And it wasn't just me imagining it. The footage clearly showed a figure. Something that shouldn't exist in the lane at all. I sat back in my chair, blinking rapidly, trying to shake off the creeping sense of dread that was curling around my ribs. I turned the camera angle, hoping for a better view. The moment I did, it vanished. Just like that. No shadow, no figure. Just the empty highway stretching into the night. I stared at the screen for a long time, telling myself I was imagining things. But even as I said it, I could feel it pressing against the back of my mind. The undeniable certainty that I had just seen something that didn't belong. The room was too quiet. Even the hum of the computers seemed muted. I rubbed my eyes, leaning forward, trying to convince myself I hadn't just witnessed whatever it was. But as soon as I returned to the live feed, I saw it again. Only this time, it wasn't standing. It was closer. It was moving along the shoulder now, sliding unnaturally, a darkness that clung to the cracks in the asphalt. I swallowed hard. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly. I considered calling it in, telling the night supervisor I had caught some kind of glitch, but there was no way I could explain this. It wasn't a glitch. A glitch didn't move with purpose. A glitch didn't... Watch you. I leaned back, heart hammering, and tried to breathe. Focus. Rational. Just traffic cameras. Just shadows. Just tired eyes playing tricks on my brain. But the more I looked, the more I realized that shadows don't move like this. They don't shift and slide as if they're alive. And they certainly don't pause to stare. I replayed the footage over and over. Each time the figure closer. Sometimes in the middle of the lane. Sometimes near the guardrail, always moving in ways that made my stomach turn. It had no face, or at least I couldn't see one, just a dark, indistinct shape. But I could feel its attention. It was aware of me, watching, waiting, and I was powerless to stop it. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second echoing in the otherwise silent control room. I tried to focus on something else, anything else, the hum of the lights, the occasional car passing miles away. But my eyes kept drifting back to that lane, to that shape. It didn't belong there. Nothing about it did. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone again. I leaned forward, hands shaking, clicking the replay. But the frame froze. And there, in the middle of the lane, was a single car. No driver. Just the vehicle, headlights off, sitting in the dark. My stomach dropped. There hadn't been a car there before. Not in the live feed, not in any of the footage I'd just reviewed. I leaned back in my chair, gripping the edge as if it would keep me grounded. I had no explanation. None. Only the creeping certainty that the highway itself was wrong. Something about that curve, that mile marker, was different. Something watched. Something waited. And it knew I was looking. I tried to shake it off. Night shifts always play tricks on the mind. My eyes were tired, my thoughts jittery. But I couldn't deny what I had seen. and I knew that the moment I closed my eyes, I would see that figure again, standing in the lane, watching me, sliding closer, waiting. The hum of the monitors grew louder, oppressive, filling my skull. I kept staring, unwilling to look away, because if I did, I might miss it. I might miss whatever it was that had appeared, whatever dark thing had chosen that lonely stretch of highway to call its own, and then, almost imperceptibly, the car moved. Just a few inches, sliding forward like it was gliding over the asphalt. No engine sound, no tires squealing. Nothing but movement. I froze. My heart felt like it had stopped. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I could only watch. In that moment, I understood something I didn't want to admit. This was no ordinary night on the highway. Whatever I was seeing, it wasn't bound by reality. It didn't obey the rules, and it was aware of me, aware of the camera, aware of the tiny human staring helplessly at a screen in a fluorescent-lit room, waiting for something that had no intention of being seen, yet demanded it. I reached for the phone to call my supervisor. My hand hovered, shaking over the receiver, but something stopped me. A thought, unbidden, creeping into the corners of my mind. What if calling it in made it worse? What if acknowledging it invited it closer? I swallowed hard. My throat was dry, my palms slick. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I only stared. And I waited. Minutes passed. I don't know how many. The figure didn't return. The car didn't move. The highway was still. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't seen the end of it, that this was only the beginning, that somehow, whatever haunted that mile marker had marked me too. And I realized with a cold, creeping certainty that I would be back at this camera, night after night, drawn like a moth to the dark. Because once you see something that shouldn't exist, that shouldn't be alive, it doesn't let go. And I couldn't either. I couldn't stop thinking about that shadow, that impossible shape sliding along the asphalt. I kept replaying the footage in my mind even when I wasn't at the control room. The images haunted my dreams, jerky movements, the dark figure standing in the empty lane, the car that glided without a sound. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. And yet I found myself back at the screens the next night, drawn by a need I didn't understand. I sat down and rewound the footage from the previous evening, frame by frame. I didn't care about the slow drag of time. I didn't care about exhaustion or sanity. I needed to see, to understand. And then I noticed something new. At first, it was subtle, a flicker at the edge of the frame, like a shadow creeping along the guardrail. But the more I watched, the clearer it became. Figures, faint at first, sometimes just a blur, sometimes more defined, moving closer to the lane. Shapes that were human in form but wrong, distorted in ways I couldn't explain. Their movements were deliberate, precise, but unnatural. They slid over the asphalt, paused, and glanced at the camera, as if aware of its watchful eye. My stomach twisted. I recognized one of the figures, not immediately, but gradually. The face, or what I could make out of it, belonged to a driver who had vanished years ago, a case I'd worked on myself. He had disappeared on this very highway, mile marker 72. At first, I thought I was hallucinating, tired and obsessed. But then I saw another, and another. Figures resembling people who had vanished over the past decade. Missing drivers, missing travelers, all creeping closer to the camera's eye, all sliding toward it with a terrible purpose. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence. Digital artifacts, weird glitches in the footage. But my heart knew better. My mind screamed at me, telling me to shut it off, to leave, to run. But I couldn't. I needed to see. I zoomed in on one frame where a man paused near the middle of the lane. His eyes, or what I imagined were eyes, seemed to fix on the camera. I could almost feel them piercing through the screen, and I realized with a shiver that the camera didn't just record them, it acknowledged them. And they acknowledged it. I scrubbed through the frames faster, trying to follow their movements. Each figure moved with deliberate unnaturalness, sometimes disappearing between frames, only to reappear closer, sometimes mimicking a driver I remembered from missing persons reports. Some smiled, or at least I think they did, but the smiles were twisted, wrong. And yet, despite the horror, I couldn't look away. Time passed differently there, in the control room. Minutes stretched like hours as I pored over the footage, my body tense. my mind screaming. The figures grew bolder, moving into the lane, sometimes pacing alongside the invisible cars that had no drivers. And then I noticed a detail that made my blood run cold. One of the missing drivers held something in his hand. Something small and indistinct, a shape I couldn't identify. But he raised it toward the camera, and I felt it as if it were directed at me, through the lens, through the glass of the screen. I blinked and shook my head, trying to clear the sensation, but every frame I looked at seemed to pulse with intent. It was as if the footage itself had become a trap, a corridor of creeping horror that pulled me deeper each time I stared. I rewound the footage again, trying to catch anything I had missed. And then I saw it, a figure at the edge of the frame, almost blending with the shadows, moving in reverse. At first, I thought it was another glitch, a smudge or a line of digital noise. But no, the shape became more defined, and my blood ran cold when I realized it wasn't just any figure. It was me, or at least it looked like me. I froze. My hand hovered over the mouse. The figure mimicked my posture, my slight slump in the chair, the way I rubbed my jaw when I was thinking too hard. But I wasn't in the lane. I hadn't left the control room. And yet, there I was, or some version of me, on the footage, moving toward the camera as if drawn by an invisible force. I stumbled back in my chair, heart hammering. My mind raced with impossible explanations, none of them logical, none of them sane. The figures, the missing drivers, the dark shapes, they weren't just haunting the footage. They were reaching through it. And now, somehow, I was in their frame. I leaned closer again, trembling. The figures slid closer, unbroken by any sense of reality. They moved through shadows, through asphalt, through the spaces between frames, and I realized with a sinking horror that the footage was rewriting itself. New frames appeared that hadn't existed before, showing the highway as it shouldn't be, showing the figures approaching me with a silent, patient hunger. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to pull back, to detach myself. But the images had already rooted themselves too deeply in my mind. Every time I opened them again, the figures were closer, and I could feel their awareness. They were waiting for something, and I wasn't sure if it was the camera or me they were after. I thought of calling it in again, of telling someone. But I knew they wouldn't understand. Even if they looked at the footage, even if they saw the creeping shadows and the figures that shouldn't exist, they wouldn't believe it. And I wasn't sure I could explain the part where I appeared in the frame, moving toward the camera as if drawn by some unseen will. Hours passed. I didn't notice. I was caught between the frames, between the digital highway and the one outside the window. The figures never blinked. They never wavered. They simply advanced, sliding along the lane, creeping closer with an impossible patience. And each time I replayed a frame, each time I adjusted the zoom or the angle, I felt their focus on me sharpened. I thought about the missing drivers again. Where had they gone? What had happened to them? And now, staring at the footage, I realized that maybe I didn't want to know, because it wasn't just the highway that had taken them. It was whatever lingered there, whatever slid along the asphalt in the dead of night, aware, patient, hungry. And now it was aware of me too. I tried to look away, tried to step back. But my eyes were glued to the screen. One figure slid closer, then another, and I realized with a sinking dread that the shapes were beginning to merge, forming something larger, more coherent, something that I couldn't comprehend. And at the center of it all, I could feel a pull, a tug on my consciousness, a whisper at the edge of my thoughts. I shook my head violently, trying to break the spell. But the footage had me. The frames were no longer just images. They were doors, windows into a space I didn't belong in, a space where the missing drivers lingered, sliding forward, waiting, and I could feel myself slipping, the control room fading, replaced by the asphalt under that overpass, the shadows stretching long into the night. And then, just for a moment, everything froze. The figures halted mid-stride, the frames paused, the highway still, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. The dark shapes weren't just figures. They weren't just missing people. They were watching me, recording me, drawing me in, and whatever waited at the end of this sequence would not let me leave. I sat back in my chair, trembling, heart hammering. I didn't move. I couldn't. I could only stare. knowing that each frame I watched was another step closer, each pause in the footage a reminder that I was not safe. And as the night dragged on, as the missing drivers, as the shadows, as the figures sliding forward in the frames moved ever closer, I realized with crushing certainty that there was no way to escape the highway, no way to escape the camera, no way to escape the creeping, patient horror that had claimed this stretch of asphalt and now claimed me in its frames. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. I just watched, and I waited. The night air was sharp against my face, biting through the thin fabric of my jacket as I stood beside the highway. I had driven out here to mile marker 72 despite knowing deep down it was a mistake. The footage, the frames, the shadows, they had pulled me here, like gravity I couldn't resist. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, knuckles white. Every muscle in my body was taut, my heart hammering in a rhythm I didn't recognize as my own. The road was empty, absolutely silent except for the soft hiss of tires on asphalt from distant cars. I walked slowly along the shoulder, my eyes scanning the darkened lanes, half expecting to see a shape sliding across the asphalt, half hoping I wouldn't. And then I saw him, a motorist parked at the edge of the road. Headlights off, engine silent. He was leaning against his car as though waiting. Nothing unusual about that except for the way he was standing. His movements were off, not quite human. A little too smooth, too deliberate. My skin prickled. I slowed. My steps careful, deliberate, yet drawn toward him. "Evening," I said, voice cracking more than I intended. He didn't respond at first. Then, slowly, his head tilted, as if he knew I was coming. His smile was small, tight-lipped, almost polite, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes, sharp, dark, too aware, made me shiver. I realized I had seen him before. Not here, not alive, but in the footage. One of the missing drivers staring through the camera, through the frames, somehow present in both the digital world and the real one. "You came back," he said. The voice was calm, measured, but it carried a weight, a certainty that made my stomach knot. I froze. I didn't. My words caught in my throat. Everything about him was wrong, as if reality itself recoiled around him. He stepped forward, then stopped, maintaining an impossible balance. The way he moved was unnatural, smooth, like he was sliding over the asphalt, echoing the way the figures had moved in the footage. "You've been watching," he said. I swallowed hard. Yes, I've been watching. I can't stop." His smile widened slightly. "Of course you can't. They pull you in. The highway, the cameras, the shadows, they want you to see. They want you here." I took a step back, suddenly aware of the silence, of the dark that seemed to thicken around us. The road curved ahead, black and empty. The headlights of distant cars stretched like thin veins of light, but they didn't reach this spot. He was the only thing there. "You don't understand," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. This isn't real. I've seen it on the cameras. It's just shadows. Just glitches." He shook his head slowly, almost mournfully. "You think that makes it easier? That calling it shadows or glitches protects you? No, you've seen them. You're in the frames now. And once you're in the frames..." His words trailed off, leaving a chill hanging in the night air. I backed up further, realizing I was on the edge of the lane. The asphalt stretched empty before me, nothing to stop me if I ran, but also nothing to hide behind. And still I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the ground. "You shouldn't be here," I said, almost a whisper. "You're not alive. You shouldn't be." His expression didn't change, but I felt the weight of his gaze, the unnatural stillness of his body. Alive, perhaps. Not alive, perhaps. But I exist in some way, and now so do you. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. I'm not part of this. I'm just observing." He laughed softly, a sound that didn't belong in the world. "Observing? You've crossed the line. Once you see them like that, once you watch, you are never just observing. You are part of it. Already they've marked you." The hair on my arms stood on end. I took another step back, almost stumbling. My eyes darted around, searching for the shadows, the figures sliding along the lane, but there was nothing. Just him, still calm, still waiting, still impossible. You're one of them," I said finally, voice trembling. "You've been taken." He shook his head slowly. No, not taken, chosen. Some of us are drawn here, yes. But the highway, it selects differently. You've seen what lurks in the frames, haven't you? Figures who vanish from the world, moving through the night, waiting for an observer. That's all they are, observers. And now, you've joined them. I stumbled backward, finally breaking the frozen tension that had pinned me in place. I don't want this. I'm just... My words died on my lips as he moved closer. Not walking, not running, sliding again, impossibly, silently, with a precision that no human could have. You don't get a choice, he said, voice low and calm, almost soothing. The highway decides. And once it has its eye on you, well, you see what the frames show. You felt it, that pull, that need to watch. You can't ignore it. And you won't. I tried to turn and run, but the air itself seemed to thicken, the night pressing against me. I felt a pull, a tug like gravity had shifted. I stumbled forward, desperate, breath coming fast, lungs burning. The lane stretched endlessly, dark and empty. But I felt as if I were moving through molasses, drawn toward him, toward the asphalt, toward the edge of the frame I had glimpsed in the monitors. You've seen the missing? He said. You've watched them slide along the highway, vanish, reappear in the footage, and now, you're next. I stumbled to the edge of the shoulder, heart hammering, mind racing. The rational part of me screamed to call it in, to flee, to escape, but I couldn't. My body betrayed me, dragging me toward him, toward the impossible reality he represented. The air around us seemed to shimmer, distort, and I realized with a sinking, sick certainty that the highway itself was bending. Not just physically, but somehow mentally, emotionally. Something about that mile marker had become more than asphalt and lines. It had become a living, watching thing, and he moved with it, as if he belonged there in a way I never could. You've been part of the frames, he continued, stepping closer, even in your room, even in your mind. That's how it starts. Watching, observing, following. The camera doesn't just record. It selects, and now you are selected. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. My vision blurred at the edges. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if each breath I took was pulling me deeper into the nightmare. I realized then the truth. The footage wasn't just recording. It wasn't just showing the missing drivers. It was drawing them. And me. And now that I was here, in this impossible intersection of night and highway, of shadow and observer, I understood that nothing would let me leave. You'll see them again, he said, voice low and certain. In the frames, in the shadows, sliding closer, waiting, and one day, you'll be one of them. I fell to my knees, chest heaving, mind screaming. The night was still. The road stretched empty before me, and yet I could feel the pull, the patient insistence, the creeping inevitability that whatever lurked in the frames had reached out. And now it had me. I don't remember how long I stayed there, pressed to the asphalt, staring into the dark. I only know that when I finally looked up, the motorist was gone. No sound, no car, no figure. Just the empty highway and the curve that led into nothing. But I knew. I knew he hadn't left. He was part of it, part of the highway, part of the frames. And somewhere in the darkness, the shadows waited, sliding forward, patient, watching. And I understood with a sick, creeping certainty that this was only the beginning. That one day, I would be on the other side of the camera, sliding through the frames, observed by someone like me, waiting for the next observer to arrive. I got into my car and drove away, hands shaking on the wheel, mind reeling. The lights of the distant city were faint, cold, and distant. I told myself it was over, that I had seen it, faced it, and left. But I knew better. I had crossed a line. I had seen the impossible, the unnatural, the figures sliding along the asphalt. And now, I was part of the highway's nightmare. I was driving the same stretch of highway I'd driven 1,000 times before, or at least, it felt that way. The asphalt stretched out ahead of me like a ribbon unwinding into nothing, flanked on both sides by forests that whispered with the wind. Headlights cut through the darkness, reflecting off the wet surface where a recent drizzle had left the road slick. I had been on patrol for hours, and yet something about this night felt different. At first I chalked it up to fatigue, There's a monotony to long nights on this road, the kind that gnaws at your sense of time. You drive, you watch the horizon, you pull over to check a license plate or a tail light, and then you drive some more. But tonight, the line between minutes and hours seemed to blur, as if the road itself were swallowing the clock. I glanced at my dashboard. My radio crackled with static, faint, intermittent, like the remnants of a conversation carried over by ghosts. The clock read 2:14 a.m., though I could swear it had been 2:14 for the last 20 minutes. I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. Patrols like this always tested patience. Still, I felt my pulse quicken, the kind of nervous energy that makes every shadow seem like it's moving just a little too fast. The highway stretched ahead, empty, but for a few distant headlights flickering on the horizon. I had the kind of familiarity with this road that allowed me to drive almost on autopilot, but tonight, I couldn't shake the feeling that the horizon kept moving just out of reach. Every curve I took seemed to reveal more road than I had expected, more black ribbons stretching endlessly. I blinked and tried to recalibrate, telling myself it was an optical illusion, a trick of tired eyes in the dark. I reached for my radio again, flicking through the channels to hear any other voices, dispatch, other officers, but the only thing I caught was that same low static. It felt heavier than usual, almost oppressive, like the air itself was resisting sound. I turned the volume down, the hum of the engine filling the cab with a familiar comfort, but it wasn't enough. The trees along the roadside seemed taller, denser than I remembered. Their branches arched over the highway, forming a tunnel that swallowed light and sound. I could almost hear the rustle of leaves as if something or someone was moving through them, following me. I told myself it was just my imagination. Officer fatigue does that to you. It amplifies shadows, distorts familiar surroundings, makes your own heartbeat sound like a drum in the silence. I tried to keep my mind on routine. Watch for speeders, check for wildlife on the shoulder, monitor traffic reports. But the road had a strange pull tonight. Miles ticked by, or maybe they didn't. The sense of distance and time seemed to warp. A turn I knew should lead to a small overpass instead revealed nothing but more endless asphalt. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, and when I looked again, the highway continued, stretching farther than it ever had. It was subtle at first. The horizon didn't shrink as it should. Signs appeared familiar, yet something about them was wrong, slightly off, as if the paint had bled or the letters had shifted in the night. I remember telling myself, don't look too close. It's probably just your eyes playing tricks. But curiosity got the better of me. I squinted at a mile marker, 123. That made sense. Then I passed another one, 123 again, and then 123 once more. My pulse picked up. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the markers had been replaced or knocked over. Maybe it was a misprint. But no matter how many times I passed them, the numbers never changed. And the horizon, it never came. I slowed my patrol car, scanning the road ahead. A fog was rolling in, thin and almost luminescent under the high beams. It didn't cling to the ground the way normal fog does. It seemed to hover, like it was suspended in time, waiting for something, or me. I considered turning around, taking the next exit, but the exits were gone. I hadn't noticed them vanish, yet the familiar ramps and off-ramps I had memorized over months of patrol simply weren't there anymore. Just more road. I turned on the cabin lights to check the map, though I rarely needed it this far down the highway. The GPS told me I was still on my assigned route, yet the road outside made no sense. It curved in ways that defied my memory. Landmarks I had relied on were missing. A small hill that should have appeared 20 minutes ago wasn't there. The rest stop I always passed on this shift, the one with the flickering neon sign, didn't exist. Nothing existed except endless black asphalt, the glow of my headlights, and the dark shapes of trees swaying in some unseen wind. That's when I noticed it. The shadows between the trees were moving, but not naturally. They shifted too smoothly, too deliberately, as if they had consciousness. I caught a flicker of something that might have been a face, or maybe it was just the fog playing tricks, the same way the horizon played tricks. My hands tightened on the wheel. I tried the radio again, hoping for any human voice, but the static was deafening now, like it had grown dense, pressing against my ears. I kept driving, telling myself to stay calm. I had been trained for long nights, for the isolation of patrol work, for moments that felt endless and unnerving. Still, the road was testing me. Every mile felt like a repeat of the last, every tree a mirror of the one before. I started talking aloud, to myself, or maybe to the radio, hoping the sound of my own voice would anchor me to reality. "Dispatch," I said, though I didn't expect an answer. "This is Unit 17. No traffic on my route. Copy?" Silence except for the static hum. I exhaled and pressed on. There was a rhythm to the endless road, a cadence I couldn't name. My tires hummed against the asphalt, a constant note that meshed with my heartbeat. Hours seemed to pass, or maybe minutes. I had no way of telling. Time was a concept the highway had taken from me. Every so often, I caught glimpses of movement along the tree line, shapes that disappeared when I tried to focus on them. Once I thought I saw a figure standing just off the road staring at me, but by the time I blinked, there was nothing. A trick of the light, or not. My pulse jumped each time I thought I saw something, each time I felt the invisible eyes watching from the darkness. I tried reasoning with myself. Road stretch. Sometimes you hit a flat stretch that seems to go on forever. I've driven miles without landmarks before, but this wasn't that. There was a weight to the darkness, a pressure that made it feel alive. The road was endless, yes, but it wasn't just long, it was conscious, and it was keeping me inside it. I remembered my training. Stay alert, focus on the known, ignore distractions. But the known was disappearing. The road bent and twisted in ways that defied the maps, the terrain, even my memory. Every mile marker repeated. Every sign felt wrong, and yet I couldn't stop. Something inside me, some primal instinct, kept pressing the accelerator, kept me moving forward, deeper into the darkness. By the time I reached what should have been the 20th mile of the patrol, I realized something that made my stomach turn. I had passed a particular curve multiple times. I recognized the same gnarled tree on the right, the same cracked guardrail on the left. I had passed them before, had to have, yet I could not be sure. It was a loop, I realized, a nightmare loop. My own highway had become a cage. Panic didn't hit immediately. It was subtle, creeping, seeping into the edges of my mind. I kept driving because I had to, because stopping felt like surrendering to whatever was out there, or whatever had made the road this way. The headlights cut through the fog, revealing nothing but more asphalt, more trees, more shadows that seemed to lean closer with every turn. I don't know how long I drove like that. Minutes? Hours? The fog thickened, swirling around my car like smoke in a dream. My reflection in the rearview mirror was pale, gaunt. My eyes were wide, unblinking. And still, the road went on. Somewhere along the endless mile, I began talking to the road itself. Softly at first, then more insistently. "What do you want?" I asked aloud, though I already knew I wouldn't get an answer. "Why do you stretch like this? Why won't you end?" The highway offered no reply. Only the hum of tires, the hiss of the wet asphalt, and the low, almost imperceptible whisper of wind through the trees. I felt it then, the unmistakable weight of being watched, followed, measured. It was as if the road itself was alive, feeding on my awareness, testing my patience, eroding my certainty. And yet, I drove. I had to. Because stopping, I knew, meant losing everything. Hours later, or maybe minutes, I could no longer distinguish between them, I realized that the road wasn't just ahead of me. It was inside me, inside my mind. Every shadow, every turn, every mile marker that never changed was burned into my vision. I was part of it now, part of the endless mile. And as I pressed on, deeper into the night, I understood one horrifying truth. Some roads don't end. Some roads never want you to leave. I thought I knew this highway. I thought I had seen every turn, every sign, every landmark. But the moment I drove past that first road sign, I realized I had been wrong. It was simple enough at first. A standard green mile marker indicating the next town. Maplewood, 12 miles ahead. I had passed through Maplewood dozens of times. I didn't even glance at the speed limit. I knew it by heart. But as I drove, something began to gnaw at the edges of my mind. The distance wasn't shrinking. The numbers weren't changing. 12 miles ahead stayed 12 miles ahead. And then, impossibly, 13, 14, 15. The towns were stretching away from me, as if the road itself were moving faster than I was, or I slower than the road. And then came the signs that didn't belong. The first one appeared on the right. Crestfall, 7 miles. I didn't remember a town called Crestfall anywhere in this county. I checked my GPS. Nothing. No town, no street, no settlement. The sign was old, its paint flaking, the reflective letters dulled, but it was perfectly legible in the beam of my headlights. I laughed nervously. Must be new, I muttered to myself. Patrol fatigue, my imagination. Maybe some prankster had planted a fake sign along the highway. I tried to dismiss it, but then more appeared. Evermere, 5 miles. Black Hollow, 3 miles. Names I had never heard, names that seemed to ripple with a sort of quiet menace, each more ominous than the last. The font was consistent with official highway signs, yet the towns didn't exist. My mind clutched at logic, detours, temporary constructions, something municipal. But the further I drove, the less sense it made. These weren't detour signs. These weren't warnings. These were invitations. Or traps. I tried to focus on reality. I checked my rearview mirror, scanned the road behind me. No other cars, no lights, just the dim glow of the road stretching endlessly, swallowed by fog and darkness. The forest pressed close, black trunks leaning over the road, as if the trees themselves were eavesdropping. The next sign made me freeze mid-breath. Your destination awaits. 0 miles. There was no name, no town. Just those words. My hands tightened on the wheel. I glanced at the GPS again. Still my assigned route. Still the road I had always patrolled. Still the same endless mile markers repeating over and over. But the sign felt deliberate. It wasn't part of the highway system. It didn't belong here. And yet it was here. I pressed on. The rational part of me, every bit of training I had, screamed to turn around, to exit, to get off this cursed stretch of road. But when I looked for the next exit, it wasn't there. It had vanished, swallowed by the highway. The road didn't bend or turn. It simply continued, smooth, dark, endless. More signs appeared. Some were ordinary, speed limits, warnings of curves, reminders to buckle up. Others seemed to mock reality. Next gas station, never. Hospital, out of reach. End of the road, not yet. I started reading them aloud, my voice cracking slightly in the cold night air. The words felt heavier the longer I spoke them, as though saying them aloud gave them weight, power. My pulse drummed in my ears. My eyes darted between the fog and the trees, the signs and the asphalt, trying to anchor myself in something solid, something known. But the more I read, the more I felt like the road was listening. The signs were speaking directly to me, guiding me, warning me, taunting me. I caught a flicker in the corner of my eye, a shadow crossing the shoulder, moving too fluidly to be human. My hands froze on the wheel. I blinked. Gone. Just the road, the fog, the signs stretching endlessly ahead. I tried to think back to past patrols, to what I had learned about disorientation on long stretches of highway. Fatigue, repetition, optical illusions, all of it made sense. And yet this wasn't normal. My sense of time had dissolved. The signs repeated in impossible sequences. The towns multiplied or vanished before I could process them. My eyes hurt from scanning the distance. My jaw ached from the tension I didn't realize I was holding. At some point, a sign read simply, "Don't look back." I did, of course. Instinct. Behind me, nothing. The headlights cut through the fog. Nothing moving, no other cars, no light in the trees, no approaching danger. But the warning had weight. It felt like a voice pressing against the inside of my skull, echoing the static hum I had heard earlier over the radio. I swallowed hard and forced my gaze forward. The next mile marker flickered into view. Oddly familiar, same number as before, 123. I had passed it. I knew I had passed it. I had to have passed it. But the trees, the fog, the signs, they all whispered otherwise. Time and space were bending here, the road stretching and contracting like a living thing. and I was caught in its grip. Then the signs began to speak in a way that made my stomach twist. Not just the names of towns, not just directions. They started forming messages, full sentences, sentences that shifted and changed when I looked away and back. Turn around while you still can. You are not alone. Every mile counts. I muttered each one under my breath, the words tasting metallic and wrong. Every sign was a warning, a promise, a command. I wanted to exit. I wanted to pull off to the shoulder, to call dispatch, to scream. But the road mocked me. There was no exit. Only the endless stretch and the signs that had begun to occupy my mind, burrowing into my thoughts until I could barely distinguish them from my own memory. One sign glimmered in the fog, bright and shining. Home is behind you. You are not returning. I slammed my hand on the steering wheel. My chest tightened. Panic clawed at me. I wanted to turn, to escape, to fight this impossible logic, but the wheel was heavy, the road unyielding. I was trapped in a corridor of asphalt and trees and words that weren't meant to exist. I whispered to myself, trying to anchor sanity. This is a road. Just a road. It's blacktop and paint and signs. That's all it is. But the voice of the signs, their impossible destinations and warnings, lingered in my head. I could feel the weight of them pressing against my skull, pulling me forward deeper into the unknown. Hours, maybe minutes, passed. The names of towns multiplied, vanished, and reappeared in impossible sequences. I caught glimpses of signs in the rearview mirror, even though I knew none should exist behind me. The forest bent oddly in my peripheral vision. Shadows clung to the edges of the road. The static in the radio grew louder, deeper, vibrating through the cab of my car, echoing the words on the signs. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take another mile, I saw a sign that froze me entirely, only forward. Do not stop. The words weren't just written. They were etched into my mind. I could feel them pressing into the folds of my consciousness, demanding compliance. Every instinct screamed to defy them, but my body moved automatically, hands gripping the wheel, eyes scanning the endless black ahead. I was moving forward because the road would not let me do otherwise. I realized then that the highway had become something alive. Not just asphalt and paint, not just a path from one town to another. It was aware of me. It measured my fear, my hesitation, my stubborn will. The signs were its voice, its method of communication, its way of ensuring I stayed inside it, kept driving, kept moving forward through the impossible landscape it had created. I tried to remember training, protocol, logic. I tried to fight the pull of the road. But every time I thought about stopping, I saw another sign appear, another impossible destination, another cryptic warning. The road had made rules, and I was trapped within them. The forest leaned closer. The fog thickened. The mile markers repeated. The towns multiplied. And the signs, oh, the signs, they never stopped, never ceased, never let me forget that I was no longer just driving a highway. I was inside its mind, a player in a game I didn't understand, with rules I could not break. And I knew, deep down, that this road would not let me leave, not while it still had words to whisper, signs to display, and miles that never ended. It started as a routine patrol, same as always. The fog clung to the asphalt like a living thing, and the trees pressed close to the road. But I kept my focus, kept my eyes on the headlights ahead. That's when I saw the car sitting on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking faintly through the mist. I slowed, pulling up behind it. Another driver in trouble. Routine. I flipped on my lights and stepped out, the night air thick and damp against my skin. I approached, hand resting on my holster out of habit rather than necessity. The driver's side door opened and a man stepped out. Tall, lean, his coat soaked through with moisture. His face was pale, almost translucent in the glow of my patrol car's lights. Need some help? I asked, keeping my voice calm. He nodded, smiling briefly, but there was something off, something in the eyes that didn't feel human, or at least not fully present. I hesitated, a chill crawling up my spine, but I masked it with professionalism. I ran out of gas, he said, voice quiet but clear.
Could you
give me a ride? I glanced at the empty back seat and the long stretch of highway ahead. It didn't feel right, but something about his presence pulled me in. I unlocked the passenger door, gesturing for him to get in. He slid across the seat silently, and I noticed a faint scent, earth, damp leaves, something decayed underneath that I couldn't place. We drove in silence for a few miles, the fog swallowing the taillights of my patrol car behind us. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror. He seemed almost too still, too quiet, his eyes fixed on some point far beyond the windshield. "Where are you headed?" I asked, keeping the tone casual. He didn't answer immediately. Then finally he said, "You shouldn't be here. Not now. Not alone." I tried to shake it off as nervousness, paranoia. Roads like this played tricks on your mind. I had driven it hundreds of times, but there was an urgency in his tone that made the hair on my neck stand up. "Just get you to the next town," I said. "We'll find gas and you can be on your way." He shook his head slowly. "There is no next town. Not the one you know." I swallowed hard. The words made no sense, yet they resonated with the uneasy feeling I had been carrying since the endless mile. I considered turning around, but instinct told me not to. I was trapped in some kind of rhythm I couldn't escape, my hands gripping the wheel, eyes scanning the foggy horizon. After a long silence, he spoke again, softer this time. "They watch the road. They remember everything. You can't leave without listening." I glanced at him sharply. Who watches the road?" He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned back in the seat, staring at the fog-draped trees. Then, almost casually, he asked, "Do you remember the first sign?" I did. I remembered it clearly, the one that said, "Your destination awaits, 0 miles." The memory twisted in my mind, bringing a fresh wave of unease. "You shouldn't have seen it," he murmured. A shiver ran down my spine. "Seen what?" I asked, trying to maintain control of my voice, though the dread was climbing, curling around my chest. "The road," he said. "It doesn't let people leave, not without warning them first, and it doesn't like surprises." I gripped the wheel tighter. "I don't understand." He turned his head slightly, just enough that the dim light caught his face. "You will." Soon enough, the car fell into silence again. The fog grew heavier, and I noticed that the road ahead seemed to stretch farther than it should. The horizon kept receding, bending in ways that made my stomach lurch. I tried to focus on the lines painted on the asphalt, the familiar reflectors along the shoulder, but even they felt wrong. Then he spoke again, voice low and urgent. "Another one will come. A woman. She will need your help. Remember what I say. Listen to what they warn you. Do not dismiss it. Never dismiss it." I glanced in the side mirror, expecting to see a car approaching. Nothing. Just fog. "Another one?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady.
What do you mean?
He didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed somewhere far beyond the road. Then he said, almost in a whisper, "Some of us don't stay. Some of us vanish, but we leave messages. You must hear them." I tried to laugh it off. A nervous chuckle. "Messages? From who?" "The road," he said simply. That's when it happened. I looked over at him, and in the blink of an eye, he was gone. The seat beside me was empty, the car silent except for the hum of the engine and the wet tires against asphalt. My heart slammed against my ribs. I slammed on the brakes, throwing the patrol car into a skid along the slick surface. The fog swirled around me, dense and heavy, but there was no one there. No sign he had ever been there. I sat frozen, hands gripping the wheel, eyes scanning every shadow, every shape that moved in the fog. The fear wasn't panic yet. It was something slower, a creeping realization that this road was far more than a simple highway. It was alive, aware, and it didn't like witnesses. I pressed on, shaking, trying to rationalize it. Maybe he ran off the road. Maybe I imagined it. But my instincts told me otherwise. I could still feel the chill of his presence in the seat, the lingering scent, the faint impression of his form against the vinyl. Miles later, I came across another vehicle. A woman this time, standing by the side of the road, shivering in the fog. She looked terrified, wrapped in a coat too thin for the damp cold. I pulled over. Same routine, same careful approach. She looked at me, eyes wide and hollow. "You shouldn't have come here," she said. I paused, unsettled by her familiarity. "Where do you need to go?" She shook her head. Not where you think. The road, it remembers. It doesn't forget. Her words hit me like a blow. My pulse spiked, and I glanced at the empty passenger seat behind me, remembering the man who had vanished. I swallowed hard. I can take you somewhere safe, I said, trying to keep calm. Just get in, she hesitated. Then slowly she slid into the car. The instant she was inside, the temperature seemed to drop. Her eyes darted to the rearview mirror as though she could see something I couldn't. They're behind us, she whispered. I swallowed. Who's behind us? The road, she said. The road remembers everything it sees, and it doesn't like being ignored. I gripped the wheel tighter. The words felt true in a way that was undeniable. The highway was no longer just asphalt signs and trees. It was memory, awareness, a living archive of every soul who had traveled it. And now I was part of it. As we drove, she began to speak of impossible things, other drivers who had vanished, signs that had changed when no one was looking, shadows that followed and sometimes spoke. Each story was a thread weaving itself into the fabric of the road, and I could feel it tugging at my mind, reshaping my perception of reality. And then, as suddenly as before, she was gone. I slammed on the brakes again, heart hammering. Empty seat. No warning. No sign she had ever existed except in my memory and the lingering echo of her voice. The patrol car continued forward, the engine's hum now a hollow, echoing sound. The fog pressed in from all sides. The signs repeated, the mile markers counted endlessly, the asphalt stretched beyond comprehension. I realized that every encounter, every vanished passenger was a warning, a message etched into the infinite length of the road meant for me, and I understood, with a cold certainty, that the road was patient. It could wait, it could watch, it could trap. It would let you drive for hours, for days, for lifetimes if it needed. But it remembered. Every face, every fear, every hesitation. And if you didn't listen, it would remind you in ways that no patrol training or human logic could withstand. By the time the fog began to thin, I had driven further than I had ever imagined. The highway stretched endlessly before me, but I knew something crucial. The passengers from elsewhere were part of the road's language, its method of imprinting memory into those it ensnared. And I, unwillingly, was learning to read it. I had no choice but to keep driving.